Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be talking about Neon Ghosts, A Witch's Sin by Daniel B. Greene. I can't tell you what I was really expecting going into this, aside from, being more coherent than the ending of Breach of Peace. Somehow we didn't get there. I actually think that Neon Ghosts is worse than Breach of Peace, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you've read the two. So back when Breach of Peace, I think it was the year that Breach of Peace came out. I read that book. Well, we read it for the loin stream, and I think there's even a review on the channel here for back then, because back then I was doing reviews after the loin stream ended, and I didn't feel like finishing that because I knew that there was another book that came out or was going to come out. But I felt like it was a growing pains kind of writing project, so I didn't really have any desire to see what came after it. But I did put aside that when the author went on to doing a full novel, I would read that. So I've had Neon Ghosts since 2023. But I just never got around to reading it because obviously my reading has been kind of controlled in different ways. So finally to this, the novel doesn't have, the biggest thing with this novel is that I don't feel like it has an identity. It partially feels like fanfic of self, of like playing through some things, but overall it does not have an identity. And it tries, like, if you read the reviews, you get like this mixed description of like fantasy and cyberpunk, but this novel is entirely fantasy with cyberpunk paint. And the cyberpunk is not barely there. The only way that cyberpunk is there is they've got glowing tattoos, which can be fantasy, by the way. And also there's no logic behind the glowing tattoos. And it mentions injections as opposed to like inking. So it comes across more as the glowing tattoos that may appear in fantasy novels, and then the random ads. But there is nothing in this that actually says cyberpunk, which includes the style of conflict, the style of society, and instead you've got this somewhat technologically advanced world that is making a conflict out of religion and racism with vampires. Spoiler. This is going to be full spoiler, by the way. But so, like, how are we in cyberpunk and you're making a conflict out of vampires and vampire racism, and now this is a civil rights thing? That is so far fantasy and so far away from what cyberpunk is, which is anti-corporatism. And this doesn't even get into anti-corporatism. And then you could even merge corporate with church and do a corporate church thing at least, and like have the church selling indulgences and making so much money with church stuff. And then you don't even have that. And you got a mixture of religions where there's no idea of like what the true anything is, like constantly referencing Jesus Christ or the churches. Jesus wouldn't like this, but there's a dead goddess on Mars. And then there's like, I'm assuming a goddess that the witch worships where she gets her powers. We're all over the place, okay? And it just doesn't feel like it has an identity. And in places, it really doesn't feel like the author understands what any of these elements that are being used are, and just feels like mimicking what has been seen without understanding how the pieces fit together or even how to fit the pieces together. But we're going to get into that with a full synopsis and comments. However, before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Leigh, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using the prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, that chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. The third thing is if you would like to check out any of my books and to judge me, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books. And my newest novel, the first book in the Legend of Bill Cassidy, will be coming out this fall, featuring this cast, but also there are 3 other members that aren't represented there for the main cast. This is just who we've got so far. Anyway, with all that said, let's jump right into the book. I've already prefaced with everything that I wanted to say, so we're just going to get into the first page so you can get some vibes. Quote, "If you can't be honest with yourself about this, then when will the lies end?" Taya asked. "You're judging me? You let them inject ink into your fucking eyes?" Quinn's Quinn gestured toward his own baby blues. Jagged nails, complemented by an array of gold and silver rings, flashed in the soft light of the lift. You give me shit for getting some knuckle glow. Meanwhile, you're out here lighting up your eyes? I'm just saying. Atea's grin slipped through her feigned scorn. Poking the older off-duty officer had proved particularly fruitful and joyful today. We get a couple decent gigs, and you toss your cash in for some glorified We get a couple decent gigs, and you toss your cash for a glorified manicure instead of actual wear. What? You'll want me to be able to bend bars? You want to take on some military contracts, huh? Quinn mockingly slapped at his own biceps. The black leather jacket that he wore didn't even strain in the motion, but that didn't stop Taya's partner from grinning his crooked-toothed smile at her, pale skin stretching over old acne scars. He was quite animated when he spoke, and Taya found herself focusing more on his hands than his rolling drawl when he continued. I'm flash your fire. We're synergizing. Besides, I know you're aching to use your new wear. The cybernetic implants within Taya did make her faster and stronger than her body would typically allow, but none of the wear available within her pay grade would result in erupting heads. Though if the prices kept dropping and Taya was able to get her enforcer license, perhaps she would be able to shatter a skull with a perfect punch. The thought made her lips twitch. Not that I would ever want to do that, unless, well, some people deserve far worse. So the first thing to note about Taya and Quinn is this casual psychotism, which comes off as normal in this place. Everything about the way that this world is described in the following pages suggests that psychopathy is basically bred here, including the constant barrage of digital ads that are transmitted right to you, right to your brain, and you have to learn from an early age to shut them out. Police brutality is encouraged and normalized, but again, if everyone is more or less encouraged to be brought up with some sort of psychopathy, by not responding, by not feeling empathy because the world is so predatory, then I can't really imagine any of the cops caring about using restraint or empathy with their targets, as their targets are also not going to be showing any restraint. The other thing to note is that we get this introduction to this chapter. The other thing to note in the introduction of this chapter is that we get that Taya hasn't seen the world outside of the steel bars, that individuality is frowned upon in some ways, as she talks about decorating your living spaces with bright colors is seen as attention whoring. I don't know how we're going to be talking about attention whoring and individuality as a problem when we're living in a world of cybernetics, augmentation, and glow, because how is making your eyes glow the way that she does not seen as attention whoring when we're later going to find out, I don't remember where it said, but it said that making your eyes glow is not a common thing, but they're going to inject their eyes with glowing ink and their skin with glowing ink, and that's not seen as attention whoring. But if you decorate your living space to be bright colored, your private living space, that's attention whoring. So another thing to know about this, as far as I was able to understand, is that this entire city is built in one tower, maybe two towers, I can't quite remember, but it's all interior because there is a dangerous smog on the outside of the steel walls from whenever, the world basically ended, from when everything was so destroyed from climate change and pollution and whatever, that they built these steel walls around this place. And also, the lower you are to the ground, the closer you are to the smog. So the poor people live closer to the bottom and the richer people live closer to the top. But it's all a city within one building, which we'll get into multiple times of how I don't really understand that, because they have cars and everything inside of this building. And I just don't understand how via engineering and logistically, this could hold all of this weight. But I digress. They've got thin steel walls around everything. The city that she lives in is constantly full of noise and corruptions, prostitutes and ads and hedonism, as typical with this idea of cyberpunk or futurism. And she wants this quiet that she really can't find in this place, which is also kind of weird because she says the upper floors are quieter than the lower floors, as the lower floors are way more populated than the upper floors. And Quinn thinks that she is strange for wanting the silence. The other thing that makes this strange, and we'll get into it later when she is there, is that she can separate her consciousness basically from reality and then just go to a waiting dock in her head, which is just an entirely made up virtual world. And she meets with her best friend on a beach in the virtual world, and there are no ads, there's no noise, there's no nothing. So she's like, I want to find peace, when she can literally find peace in her head. And I know it's not the same thing, but it is also the same thing when you're treating it like it's the same consciousness. Another thing to note is that it's very, I don't know, it was never explained why Quinn was like, hey, it's weird that you're injecting your eyes with ink when we're in this world of body modifications where they're so invasive, when you're dealing with transhumanism. However, injecting glowing ink into your eyes is like a segment too far, not like changing your skin out so that you have bulletproof skin or whatever other augmentations they have. And also, I don't think we run into anybody with like metal arms or anything, so we're not at like Cyberpunk 2077 levels of Cyberpunk, but they do have technology where there are chips in their head. So it's also kind of weird. Like, again, I said at the beginning of this, I don't know if this thing has its own identity. It doesn't feel like it has its own identity because it doesn't really describe anything that makes sense of the technological advancements. And we'll get more into that as we go. Taya and Quinn get to this apartment for this job that they are currently on as enforcers. And enforcers aren't like the cops. They're like hired thugs, it seems like, because they don't have the ability to arrest anybody, but they also actually have the ability to go around and like rough people up. They're like security guards or bodyguards, but they can work with the cops, but also not. So they get to this apartment and the door opens. Taya kicks the old man in the other side, his head in, and the narration hits you hard, telling you why she is so pissed with like the cheapest way you can try to get the audience on your side. I want to say, quote, Taya's wear-powered kick sent the pervert back into the kitchen. Gerald clutched broken ribs. Let's practice listening, okay? She tried to watch as the pathetic predator tried to crawl to cover behind a kitchen island made of metal with dark marble highlights. I was hired by some concerned parents, Jerry. Walking over, Taya stomped on the back of the man's knees, resulting in a full-throated scream from the pedophile. They paid me good money to come pay you a visit. Do you happen to know why, Jerbear? So we have all telling in the narration, not the character information going in, just to note. Like, it could have had her having a conversation with Quinn and with Taya with, like, how, like, hyped up Taya is to go in and beat this guy. And Quinn's like, you need to pull back. And she's like, bruh, he molests children. Okay, don't tell me to calm down. Like, we could have had this other ways, but instead the narration hits home, pervert, pedophile, predator, hate him. Which clearly, sure, hate him, but this is a cheap way to write this. And I have to say that if the first antagonist you introduce is a pedophile, and that's the choice you have to make to get readers on your side for your main character because she's such a freaking psycho, that's not a good sign. Taya gets control of the old man and gets into his head, displaying some of the videos of him stalking kids at school and forwarding all of his memory/save data towards the police station. She then gets into an altercation with him where she ends up getting shot. They fight more before Quinn comes in and disrupts, finishing the job while Taya goes outside to breathe and scream at the neighbors to stop gawking. Quinn also calls the cops along because they're acting as enforcers tonight, which means that they can't make arrests, but cops are still coming to complete the job. Now, the important thing to note here is that Quinn is a cop. He's just an off-duty cop. Now, you'd wonder, can't you freaking just arrest people as an off-duty cop if you know that they're doing bad things? And why are you going on this cop-related job as an enforcer? Like, for the longest time, I thought enforcers and cops were the same thing, but this was just like a way of calling them in this world. But they're just thugs. And it's really weird, especially with Quinn being a cop. And he's like, I'm going to go and do this thing and then call the cops in afterwards. And you'll be like, hey, what's up, Quinn? I see you working overtime like usual. But this whole thing with the enforcer is supposed to be under the table because it's also considered corruption. So like Quinn then says that because this job is now closed and she did such a good job, he's going to give her a tier 3 job to do solo because that means that she can get her license, her enforcer license, when she clears the tier 3 job on her own. She's got to sell her services to the client though, because this is just like her way to get in, but not necessarily steal the jobs, so to speak. Taya wakes up being harassed by an ad robot out her window. She shoots it, and then we get background on her and Quinn. Quote, luckily for Taya, during the day, Quinn was indeed a cop, and he was happy to take care of such incidents free of charge as long as she was his apprentice. Though now that she thought about it, Taya wasn't sure that Quinn would keep it up after she took off on her own. He had helped her get started in the industry and was fiercely protective, but maybe that was only because of her position under him. While getting jobs seemed very doable without Quinn, having to obey laws or risk endless fines would curb her actions. In the face of the police and military's ongoing war to maintain order and resulting records amounts to violence, Structure 703 was beginning to rely heavily on those in her profession. Once Quinn concluded her apprenticeship and Taya managed to get a few clients willing to recommend her services, she imagined the financial strain of the last year would become much more manageable. With a smile, she breathed a sigh of anticipation and relief. Now, with all of the help that Quinn has given Taya, I don't know why he would suddenly turn on her when she became, like, free, because he's encouraging her to get her license. He's helping her get her license so they can be on the same level. Like, he is the one setting her up with these jobs and helping her through. So I don't know why she already believes that he only wants her so long as she is underneath his power, because we also don't have any reason to believe that. We didn't see anything in their relationship to even suggest that. So it's so out of left field to already be demonizing this guy that you would think that she would at least trust somewhat. Also, I feel like we should take a moment to acknowledge the true and honest villain of this book that we can all get behind, and that is ads, especially intrusive brain rot ads. She meets with her friend Juno, who is on her way to school. Juno is super peppy, also has plant tattoos all over her body, and is going to be a mortician, or is training to be a mortician. She's trying to convince Taya to drop this career pursuit that is super dangerous to continue going to school where she can get a more legitimate and safe job that is not enforcement, hinting at Taya having been expelled before, but saying that she can get a better job with a degree and some combat experience working for like the military or something, because at least she's not a thug. I may say thug over enforcer just to be clear with what we're dealing with. Taya laughs it off, saying no, she's not quitting her freaking job. Then Taya is bugging Juno about a possible love interest being hinted at, and Juno leaves before Taya can poke her further. While Taya has to stay on this metro to get to her client, Mrs. Carson, whom Quinn has pushed her towards at the end of this last chapter. As she is traveling, she is listening to a talk show that goes between a vampire named Martel and an AI algorithm who stands in to capture the ideas of the viewers as they send in their thoughts basically via Twitter, and then the AI algorithm compresses those ideas to then put into something that is easily expressed in like one or two sentences that can be a conversational thing instead. It kind of just tries to grab the general vibe of the audience and to transfer that into a live conversation with the subject of the talk show. The vampire is asking about equality laws so that all vampires won't be punished as a collective when one does something wrong, and just that one can be punished. And the model has a problem with this. The model is most offended that something dead wants to change the laws for the living. The argument goes, quote, Miss Blue, I would be happy to answer the questions about the state of undead consciousness right after you explain to me the basics of how consciousness works in the first place. The Hollow model laughed while it processed live responses posted about the interview. Martel, I think, therefore I am. Consciousness is as simple as that. Right. While I allow our viewers a moment to process that insight, let me ask you this. Martel used his system to bring reports into the broadcast. Taya received an alert asking if she would like them downloaded to her drive. She ignored it. Crimes from the returned have plummeted since pack blood became available. We are a class working to get clean. Yet right now, at this crucial moment, our right to encryption is under threat. Why ignore positive trends in favor of fearful laws steeped in half-truths? Because you're forced to get clean. The Hollow model beamed in a soft pink glow, similar in hue to Juno's petals. Active feeders are nothing more than serial killers. We as people know each of you is affected by the exact same compulsion, even if you happen to be clean feeding at the moment. You're equating resisting these urges to those very urges not existing. Law enforcement needs greater access to the dead's communications to keep us safe. You should be in favor of this. It's not like your texts will be made public. Only law enforcement will be looking over your shoulder. Ari leaned forward, tapping glow-filled nails on the table between the two. Did you respect the humans you consumed, Mr. Mancini? Do you really think that your struggle for equality is the same as the living have fought? Absolutely not. Only a fool would. This is not a struggle based on class, race, or sexual orientation. This is in no way an interhuman struggle. The vampire leaned back, inhaling deeply as he bit his lower lip. Fangs glinted in the studio lights. But I've spent nearly a century now working to undo the harm done by my hands. Do you not believe redemption is possible? Justice, as it should be, is up to the victims. I represent simply the opinions of the majority. Majority of your followers, Miss Blue. There are some problems with this interaction back and forth. So, like, he obviously wants the freedom for his people to like not be monitored by the government. All fair and good. But your robot is going to answer what is consciousness with I think therefore I am. Martel could obviously just be like I think therefore I am. Like the robot doesn't have any response, and all of the viewers don't have any response for how a vampire lacks consciousness, which is what this could have been about with the chasing of instincts and how the choosing pack blood, which is obviously blood from like synthetic blood in a pack, is a conscious choice, which proves that vampires are not just animals chasing instinct, but have consciousness and can make choices. That's what would make sense. Instead, we have this I think, therefore I am, and then we go off into something entirely different, and I think, therefore I am doesn't actually have a conversation, doesn't actually enter a conversation of what is consciousness and how vampires lack it. You're just then going, well, you're dead and we're alive, and you have nothing to show for it. This should have leaned so much more heavy, if that's what it wanted to do, in how vampires are considered animals who chase instincts. The other thing that's going to come up in general with the whole garbage with these vampires and the way that it's asking this stuff is Martel refuses to acknowledge that there are still vampires that feed on humans. So they're going to be like, nah, like, punish the individual over the collective. Like, let's not harm everybody, but he will refuse to acknowledge that there are actively vampires feeding and murdering on humans, and that the vampires who could police their own don't. So then you just pretend that they don't exist, which is going to cause issues, making non-deads, making, humans not trust vampires, because vampires are obviously lying for one another. So then you got like, well, why should we trust you when you're not going to acknowledge any of these problems and you're going to cover for one another? And obviously you're going to stand up for the privacy of one another who are all doing this thing. Like there are some complex issues involved in this that are not being approached. And then he wants to say that she is the one being biased by them wanting justice from the murder that these monsters are creating in society. But he won't recognize that the majority of his followers who are vampires are going to biasly agree with him as well. So if you're going to point to somebody and be like bias, be ready to point to your own bias as well in this sort of situation. Again, so many of the conversations in the story in general feel like they are surface level repetitions of something that was said somewhere else. Like there is a lot of stuff in here that I feel like I've heard somewhere else, said somewhere else. We're going to get into those as we get there. But that there is just this lack of understanding of what is being argued. It's mimicry of what has been seen without further understanding like what it is that is actually being said. Add to that, this introduces that there is a radical extremist group of vampires that's been attacking people. Well, that's just natural if you think about it, but they're considered extremists. And that's what's being argued about right now, as they want to keep their rights to have their text messages private. But the vampires are seeing this as the first step to the government deciding to eradicate all vampires once they're able to read all of their texts, and then that can be used on like to take away other rights. It sounds like he also has a mixed race son whom he is not allowed to see because of the divides between human and vampires, but he also is like obviously traveling regularly between humans, and so he obviously would have a relationship with his wife in some way, or the mother of his child in some way. And like, is a child of a vampire a half vampire? Would he be ousted like other vampires, or would he be all human because there is no DNA part of a vampire? It's just like, I don't know. I would also be interested in knowing how like cybernetics or the glow actually affects the skin and blood that the vampires consume. Like, is it poison? We're never going to get that answer, but that's an extra thing that you input. And if people have cybernetics, so like their skin is replaced, if they have any metal parts, are they taking any medications that like make it so their body doesn't reject those parts? That's actually one of the things that I really loved about Deus Ex, is that you had the psychosis and the body rejection if people got the cybernetic replacements, but they didn't take the medicine, so their body and mind didn't reject just the metal parts in their body. And it puts such a strong reliance on not just the corporations who have now made you a forever customer because you need this non-rejection medicine, but it put a huge risk that came with those cybernetic enhancements. So it wasn't just becoming superhuman. It's like, if you run out of medicine, good luck. And so you would think that these cybernetic enhancements, and especially like stuff like glow, would maybe be dangerous to ingest. And so then maybe people had started using the glow so that they could poison vampires or discourage vampires from like biting into them or feasting on them. But it would still result in vampires dying because vampires are chasing their instincts or allowing their instincts to drive them, which then lets them still bite into these people. It depends. It depends. But you could have done like the whole poison tree frog thing with them. And that's an entirely different way that this story could have gone, that or included in its world building, that it didn't. As Martell is demanding if he should be able to see his son when he's not allowed to see his son because of the racial differences, Taya turns off the channel. Quote, Taya snorted at the thought, feeling much less interested in finding a feed to watch. It all felt endlessly repetitive to her. Public broadcasts were all vampire-obsessed, politics, sex, and tech. Again, reading like this is just a repetition and a mimicry of what cyberpunk, aside from the vampires, what cyberpunk is without understanding or even putting it in there. Then she's in Mrs. Carlson's house talking about this girl named Nita. So this takes like a hard turn of she's on the bus, and that's the last thing in that area where we're just like hard turned into the middle of a conversation and there is no segue. And it was really jarring that I had to have like 2 or 3 other people read it to be like, is it just me or is this just like smack you in the face? There's no scene setting. There's no really telling you that you're going anywhere. When you're reading on a digital pad, it doesn't, depending on what your page looks like, it doesn't even show you the spaces between them. It was just really poorly executed. So it takes us a bit of time to understand what we're talking about in the middle of this scene. And it happens that Mrs. Carlson adopted this girl named Nita some time ago, and this girl Nita has gone missing. Now, Mrs. Carlson is this sort of well-off that is super rich, and she has been such a part of the rich class that when the world population tried to fly off to Mars to escape the dying Earth, all the rich people went. However, Mars colonies didn't exactly work out, so they had to be brought back to Earth, and because everybody knew about the Mars colony thing and were being left behind to die on this plagued Earth, the normies kind of got a little bit of resentment towards all of the rich people that left them behind to die. And so now the rich people get to live with the resentment of everyone else, them. So you have that. The last place Nita was apparently seen, and Nita's like a 10-year-old girl, was at this bar and brothel below these upper floors of the city. How she got there, why she was there, who knows? Taya confirms that she'll be doing this job before leaving and calls Quinn to let him know that she got the job. So there was literally no convincing. Quinn was like, you're gonna have to convince the lady to take your job. And then we just like literally skip into the conversation where she's basically already been hired. So we don't even get to see what she has to do to get the old lady's trust, which it seems like she already had the old lady's trust. So why did Quinn say that in the first place? Who knows? Quinn tells her not to get too attached to clients. You never know what'll happen. While Taya makes a joke about how, haha, yeah, sure, this nice old lady is going to turn out to be a bad person. Like, look at her. She looks like a grandma. She's got old lady vibes. She's not going to be a serial killer. It's fine. Quinn offers his help and encouragement if Taya needs it. She just has to ask. Also, she's informed that the pervert that they had jumped on previous day actually has killed himself rather than being arrested. Many such stories. They hang up with each other, and now she wants to go to her augmentation guy, Stubbs, and get a refund on her not bulletproof skin because that pervert had shot her and it had pierced her in a way that it shouldn't have. So she's like, excuse me? When she gets to the shop, it turns out that when she said she wanted a refund, she lied to the audience because she actually just straight up tells Stubbs, no, I want an upgrade. I'm here for an upgrade. And he is upgrading her a little bit at a time because she doesn't have money to do like a bulk upgrade. So she is getting bits upgraded slowly. Stubbs is described as pretty much your augmentation buddy Victor from Cyberpunk 2077, and that Taya had a crush on him a while back, seemed fun to sleep with, but she never did. Here, the guy tests her upgrades, showing her that it wasn't bunk, that he hadn't cheated her, that pervert had some kind of special bullet in his gun that pierced Taya. And I don't know why this is brought up, because we never get that weird bullet to come back. They never like look into the bullet, and it's never used further in the story. So like why it even needed to happen earlier on, I don't really know. She's put under basically anesthetic or just made to pass out so that they can get her little upgrades going on later. And as she does this, whenever she's being upgraded, she's able to like send her brain, her consciousness to a cloud, which also, look, if your consciousness is basically able to move around because it's data, and so you can send it to like a cloud hangout space or whatever, how can a robot thing argue that it's got more consciousness than a vampire? Again, we made all of the wrong conversation points in that argument. So she's being upgraded by Stubbs. She's sitting on this beach in her dreams, reading a fantasy smut book that was suggested to her by Juno. We all know that it's Fourth Wing, let's be real. And then Juno appears, quote, Taya put the drink back down and continued reading the latest fantasy smut novel by the legendary Adina Winter, recommended to her by Juno. Her patio-style couch molded against her body perfectly as she snuggled down into the particularly spicy scene. Just as the characters began tearing at each other's clothes, Juno appeared. Oh, have you gotten to that part where they bang on top of a dragon? Juno sat up from her suddenly visible beach chair and crossed her legs, summoning her own tropical drink. Christ! Taya jumped, knocking her drink to the side. The drink vanished before hitting the ground, then reappeared at her side. Damn it! Spoilers, June! Yeah, 'cause you can spoil porn. I cannot help the feeling of this being like, hello, other book readers, I'm relevant and biblically aware. I don't know, it was just why. Taya's then talking to Juno about the case that she is on, and she's pretty sure that the kid's dead, and this is all just, it's gonna be a suckfest. In a not sexy way. Juno is pissed to hear that Taya was shot the day before, and that Taya isn't the one that told her it was actually Quinn. She's freaking out somewhat, saying that you should switch jobs before you get permanent damage that you can't undo. They fight over how dangerous Taya's profession is. Quote, funny, we talked about this hours ago, yet you, Juno's voice jumped in intensity, somehow omitted the being shot in the fucking chest part. Taya tried to take the intensity for what it was, a genuine display of love and concern. I'm just getting the damaged armor fixed, she lied. Want me unprotected? Nice try, but actual logic dictates that you don't get shot in the first place. Is this an acceptable week at the office to you? Yup. June, it's just another year, tops. Taya pushed down a spike of frustration. Look, you know that I'm safe now, right? Hell, you have access to my systems. Track me on this gig if you want. Juno stood. And you know that's pointless. I'm sorry, my life makes you uncomfortable. Taya remained sitting and let her voice grow distant. I'm just getting by. You're just getting an adrenaline fix, Juno snapped. You can change professions, but I can't. I'm struggling to comprehend just how many ballparks away from point you are. Juno seemed annoyed at Taya's lack of anger. Stop the lazy-ass deflecting. I guess that's hard to understand when your biggest concern is a passing grade. A pang of hurt bled into Juno's face. She turned from Taya, cursing under her breath. It had been a cheap shot. Juno hadn't told Taya about her wealthy upbringing until months into their friendship. A pang of guilt forced Taya to break the silence. June, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm waiting on a grade from Quinn. Who am I to talk? Wasn't it literally just Juno who was begging to tag along with Taya on this job, and then Taya was like, hell no, it's so dangerous and you're a schoolgirl, you couldn't make it. She finishes off by thinking about someone named Sid, who we're going to learn was her husband/fiancé in the not-so-distant past. She thinks that she could have helped him more than she did. Then the procedure is over. Now, you should know as she blames herself for all of this that, one, I hate the way that the relationship is written between this. It's like she has to make it so Sid was resentful of her, which also ends up feeling kind of like a ripoff of Silent Hill 2 and not understanding the relationship between James and Mary. I digress. But also her husband died of cancer, and she's like, I could have done more. He had like stage 4 cancer. And then instead of just letting them have a loving relationship, as she is like constantly talking about how much she loved him, she's also got to demonize him in his death, being like, oh, he resented me for having to see him in that state, and it was so terrible from his perspective, but I still loved him. Can we just not character assassinate the dead every single time because they're no longer sexual with the main character? Like, Stop. Once she comes back to, Stubbs tells her what he's upgraded, not just her skin. Taya notices that Stubbs gave her a massive discount on the upgrade that she was given, and she didn't mention that she even wanted that upgrade or that discount. Then he warns her not to drink too much so that she can be aware of her sensors for this new part of the body that he's upgraded. What it is doesn't really say. It's just kind of vague. He also doesn't really like Quinn and believes him to be unbelievably dirty cop. Are there any non-dirty people in this universe? She's literally a thug. What are we talking about here? Everybody is dirty. This should not be a surprise to anybody when you're a freaking thug. One of Stubbs' problems is that he's a cop. He doesn't need to be doing enforcer shit, and yet he's doing it to make extra money. And for what purpose? Why doesn't he have an issue with Taya being a freaking thug? The only reason that Stubbs can think of this cop being involved in thuggery is because he's a dirty cop with a sadistic side and just likes beating people, and that's against the rules, theoretically, for the cops, so I don't know. Stubbs thinks that Taya shouldn't be working with the guy, but that's where that's left. Now, Taya should have actually just said, look, as soon as I get my license, I don't have to work with him anymore, and I don't plan to work with him anymore. She was pretty much saying that earlier on, because she was saying, well, I don't think that he's going to want to work with me anymore anyway, in the middle of the other chapter. So, like, what? Where are the established relationships in this? Now at the bar, presumably where Nita disappeared, Taya talks to the bartender and gets a lead that this is exactly where she was and that there is a tape. She also spots a group of vampires hanging out. Now she's thinking that Nita might have been picked up by a group of vampires for a young, delicious snack. She looks over the security footage and sees a vampire in there waiting for this girl. The security guy gets really anxious and kicks Taya out of the security box. She checks all of the areas that were on the security footage to look for anywhere that, like, the girl may have hidden or where there might be any signs of her being taken somewhere. Eventually, she leaves the club without finding any further leads. It should be noted that Taya was high the entire time, because as you go through the story, she is constantly hitting a vape and getting high and even saying she is high. And there were even people in the bar that she was talking to that were like, aren't you on the job? Why the frick are you high? And she's like, shut up. And I'm just, Taya, Stubbs doesn't have an issue with you, but he has an issue with Quinn. I think that we should be all having an issue with Taya. She's incompetent. She is a mooch. Has anger issues. She cannot be trusted. I don't know. I don't know who decides to make these their characters and then have problems with everybody else. She tells Quinn about what she found and pushes him for more info about vampires. So she wants to chase the one that she saw talking to Nita down on her own and tells him, no, don't worry about me. Plus, feeling pain equals being much more powerful, because she's feeling all sorts of pain from the previous day. And she's like, no, it just makes me stronger. Okay. Pain is life. She gets the name Oscar and an apartment number / location for the vampire on the video, and then waits for the vamping hour before going down to the slums, because obviously there are specific hours where vampires are more active. She gets a message from some random dwarf, literally described as a character having dwarfism, who is waiting for her, and she knows that he is a member of some guild that I don't think is ever mentioned again. She gets a letter with an encrypted single-use location and tells Quinn not to worry about her. Then, shortly after, Taya makes a call to the secret number on the letter that she got and sees a lady vampire with glowing teeth. I thought that the glow was ink, though I guess, you had the lady with the glowing nails and then the lady, and then she's got the glowing eyes, but like glow just seems to be this thing that you can do to your body that makes anything glow, but it's never described what glow actually is. The lady on the call warns Taya that this is bigger than she knows, super dangerous to pursue, so she should freaking stop her pursuit. Taya is like, nah, fam, I'm not stopping, and I'm going for Oscar. There's nothing you can do to stop me. There's an Alice in Wonderland tattoo on this woman, which is non-glow, traditional tattooing, and she says that she is not ready for this rabbit hole. Really heavy on the Alice in Wonderland. Now, if you've got a really identifiable tattoo and you are working incognito, especially with who this person is, you think that you would hide your tattoo. There is we got cybernetics, we got implants, we got replacement skins. You freaking can't cover this tattoo with like a false layer of skin so that you're harder to recognize? Because we're gonna find out that this person with her Alice in Wonderland tattoo is somebody who faked her own death to go into hiding because her husband was one of the most powerful people in society. So you would think that she would want to hide any identifiable items on her body. Taya gets to Oscar and is threatening him only to find out that he is clean and helps other vampires transition into clean life / not eating human alternatives. She is finally backed into a corner that if Oscar doesn't know anything, then she has no other leads, while Oscar actually has leads. Also, he doesn't know Helga, who is the chick with the Alice in Wonderland tattoo. She gets a little more information from Oscar about the missing girl or just about his circumstances and pretty much decides, yeah, he couldn't have done it. It was impossible for him to do it. Oscar points the finger at the trillionaire Bishop family who has been running the city since the day the walls were erected to save everyone from the smog. Quote, the Labor family was in the energy business. For generations, they had helped build the infrastructure required to power the megastructures that housed New Yorkers away from the haze. Their net worth was speculated to sit comfortably in the high billions along with a hefty number of powerful connections. But with two headlines, they had gone from famous to infamous. The patriarch of the family, James, had completely disappeared into the anti-biter talking circuit after his oldest son, Stuart, had been found guilty of a myriad of financial crimes. Days after Stuart's arrest, it was announced his stepmother had gone missing. Sarah, a woman closer to the sons in age than the father she married, had disappeared without a trace. Gossip feeds ran wild with the speculation after the Labor family's team of lawyers released a statement saying neither James Labor or anyone else in the family knew anything about Sarah's sudden disappearance. Gossip columns still ran wild, speculating where the missing wife of the religiously radical could be. The fire of scandal only grew larger when James became a vivid supporter of the Crusader Party, a group whose platforms dripped with revitalizing spiritualist fear-mongering aimed mostly at the infected community. Demons from hell was a common phrase to hear from the members of the organization. Taya being sent after a biter after asking too many questions that the Labor-owned party seemed to fit into the puzzle that she hadn't seen a full picture of. I will never really understand when people make a fantasy world and they make this like oppressor against something that is literally man-eating, threatening, dangerous thing. Because this doesn't acknowledge that the humans in society have a good reason to question and to fear the vampires, because the vampires apparently casually hunt and eat humans and don't listen to humans when they say don't. Like, there's obviously going to be a distrust. There's no conversation, there's no communication, there's no compassion, there's nothing. It's just like, oh no, they're oppressing somebody, which means they're bad. But like these fantasy authors constantly pick something that is like, oh yeah, people are afraid of them because the ogres like constantly attack the humans, and so humans have anti-ogre sentiments. But why do you have anti-sentiments against me? Like, why are people racist against me? Because you're an ogre. Ugh. It just, again, it's another failure at like understanding the elements you're putting in your own story, or like you've seen somewhere else, like other areas where there's this oppression or this racism or bias against somebody, but like not understanding why it's there. So you pick something dangerous and everybody in that community pretends that it's not happening, or that anybody having a negative response to it is insane for having a negative response to it. They're murdering people for their shits and gigs. There are many of them refusing to go to the packed lunch. So it's like everybody is a sitting target for these monsters. It is not unreasonable to be like, I don't want to die being a vampire's lunch, being hunted by people that look like people, but they're stronger and faster than people. And apparently, after all of the years in which you've got vampires alongside the cybernetics, they don't have any form of anti-vampire cybernetics. Again, like the booby trap of blood, of like dangerous poisonous blood, whatever, to get them if they're bit. Like there's nothing. Anyway, it's determined that these super rich families are involved, the Bishop family and the Labor family, one of which has someone who is also in a band. Random side fact that doesn't come up ever again, albeit they're not famous or good, they're just now in jail. It's a whole mess of stuff that Taya is not really able to confront head on. She returns to Juno and Quinn, telling them what she knows, and says that it's just too much for her to actually do anything with. She's just a nobody nobody, and there's no way that she can take on any of these bigger people in society. She admits that she just can't pursue this and that she wasn't ready for a T3 assignment. As Taya travels to tell Mrs. Carlson that her child is a lost cause, she's nervous and telling herself over and over again that things are going to be okay, the old lady won't be mad. She's also trying to not feel too bad about failing her first job. Everyone fails a job at some point, so this shouldn't be any more special than that. This can't be her first time failing at her job. Like, seriously, she works a hard friggin' thug job. She has to have failed previous jobs. As she reaches Mrs. Carlson's place, she hears that Mrs. Carlson is now dead because she didn't kill the vampire Oscar when she went to visit Oscar. And now Taya is falling into a pit of self-blame, failure, and all of this happened to a kind old lady because she failed to do her job. She then calls Quinn. Skip forward and other cops are there. Taya is being questioned about shooting some drone that hadn't even been mentioned in the previous scene when Taya was in the apartment. She shot it down because it was looking at her, and she is now a bit catatonic, in a state unable to answer questions from the cops. Quinn gets her out of being questioned or even debriefed at all after what she's been through and takes her home, saying that she doesn't need to be on this case. She won't be punished for being taken off of it, for failing it. It doesn't matter. She's a literal thug for hire. She doesn't work for the cops. See, this is where it also gets confusing of like, do thugs work for the cops or are the cops separate? Because it said that Quinn did the thuggery because he had a sadistic side that he couldn't use while he was a cop. But then it's like, you're being taken off this. Where are these coming from? Because also the person that was paying her, Mrs. Carlson, is dead. So who would there be to punish her? Is she part of is there a guild for this? Like, is that what they belong? Because she's getting a license. Who would punish? It should be noted that Taya is not only thinking of how she failed, but she failed and got high on the job, and she's about to get high again because she can't stop hitting the freaking vape. She goes into her apartment and thinks about how guilty she feels about not only Mrs. Carlson, but also her fiancé, Sid, and how he died, and she blames herself again and again and again. She's back to thinking about Mrs. Carlson and the drone that wasn't mentioned, and how that drone was left behind to see who discovered the body. That's a lead, she believed, and with it, Taya wants to hunt down and kill whoever it was that killed Mrs. Carlson. Taya's like, okay, that's the least I can do. I failed at finding the daughter. The daughter is likely dead, so the least that I can do is get back at the killer. Taya leaves. Juno calls her. Taya doesn't answer as she continues toward the metro, thinking about where she lives, like, quote, her megastructure contained it all. The lives of millions, well sheltered from the haze. Countless boxes within boxes, designed to keep humanity content and stimulated. An attempt at making a terrarium for the masses, quietly forced under the control of an unseen system. A system that needed no hand on the wheel. The nature of humanity itself kept it moving. It was a perfectly constructed environment to let madness of humankind thrive and amplify. So meta, so self-aware of being in the situation and yet doing nothing to get out of it. It sounds so much like what I was complaining about a week or two ago with stopping the story to say how something is bad just to inform the reader, as if the reader can't pick it up or need you to tell them that it's bad. Tired of existing as a victim in this city? Where have we seen that before? I get that there are no winners in the cyberpunk universe, but like, she is literally a bully for the state or some kind of thug by being an enforcer, and she's talking about being a victim of this place, but in what way are the other people not victims of this place? Like, what would make her come to this realization that she is just a victim of this place? Eventually, she answers the call from Juno and tells her the plan to track down the Labor family, saying that it is dangerous and that Juno should stay clear of her for a while so she doesn't get dragged in, so the Labors don't go after her, seeing the connection of their relationships. Also, don't tell Quinn about this because I'm doing it behind his back. As she travels, she basically Google searches the family, and we get, quote, spending her travel time researching the Labor family, Taya didn't find much that seemed relevant to the case. Much of it was common knowledge about anyone affiliated with the Crusaders. James Labor, the head of the family, preached the prosperity gospel, a philosophy far older than any of the first structures. Its practitioners believed financial success was a sign of God's approval. Apparently, the Heavenly Father dealt in luxury apartments above the clouds as well as salvation. The irony wasn't lost on her. If James Labor was to be believed, reading an excerpt from James's book made Taya feel unclean. Even the portrait of a plastic-looking, graying man on the cover, dramatically lit with piercing blue eyes, obviously edited to shade of blue that no one could achieve without glow, made her feel tainted. Jesus would hate you for getting glow, but my plastic surgery and hair plugs are fine. Taya believed a higher power had to exist for this world to make any sense, but the idea that whatever that higher power might be gave a fuck about James Labor's financial success was equal parts hilarious and disturbing to her. Taya repressed a groan as she reached a passage in the book that framed the disappearance of the Labor's wife as a challenge from God for James to overcome. The complete dismissal of Sarah Labor's own possible pain and or death was the final nail in the narcissist's coffin. She could kill this man and feel nothing but pleasure at removing the parasite from this world. This brings up the question of just how much is religion intertwined with this society. We know that this society is in North America because she mentioned it being in New York City. The biggest family in this society, or the two biggest families, are apparently religious. And how does that translate into cultural influence? How did these people who have the Crusaders Party take over society, and how religious is society in general? There is no sign of this anywhere. Even ads should reflect the idea of money equals God's approval. Go and get your indulgences, get blessed by God by paying money. Like, there should be something like have the whatever gods exist with a prayer. Then we mention Jesus, and it's like, okay, so we've got like random gods and we've got Jesus. And we're back to doing soul fraud levels of like, what the frick is this? We haven't seen any of this religious influence, nor the influence of these rich people in any of the ads that have gone through this story, or in any of the businesses that have been referenced. Now, quite honestly, I don't think that Taya's in too much of a position to be judging people the way that she is. She's just coming off as arrogant, which, whatever, she can be arrogant. I don't like her, and the only leg that she has to stand on was making the first villain a literal pedophile. Otherwise, she's just horrible. For me, when you make your biggest villain or your first villain, like the freaking biggest villain in the book, always a pedophile, it speaks to like needing the most help humanly possible to make your character not the worst person on the page. Like, me or the pedophile, it's your choice. Eventually, she goes to visit Paul, the bartender from the club. He's at his house, hacks into his house before bothering him to let her in. And she tells Paul about the murder of the old woman and the missing girl. Seeing his reaction confirms that he didn't do it. She also constantly is sizing him up about how she might kill him if things go sour. And I'm just like, bro, I have a hard time caring about your pursuits as you're looking at civilians with murder hot on your hands, even against somebody who hasn't done anything to you yet. And we're supposed to be like rooting for you. You're just a bad person. I don't want you to succeed. I want you to get shot before you kill any other innocent people. We know that's not going to happen. She's only going to become more powerful, but like still. She keeps threatening him, disarming him of his gun that he was carrying, and he's still not being aggressive with her or defensive. He's also not showing any fear. Literally, there's no response to the way that she is acting. Again, harkening back to friggin' soul fraud where there's just like nothing. Taya says that her glowing eyes freak people out because they are so rare, but this is an odd statement considering how much other weird stuff is going on, and like, why wouldn't people get their eyes injected when there's just, it's cool and there's no downside to it. As she's threatening him, she keeps thinking about how much more she wants to hurt him, this civilian who has done literally nothing but help her at the bar, give her a lead, freaking let her into his house and answer questions. Quote, the fear in Paul's voice was soothing in a way that made Taya sick. Her mind drank in the adrenaline and the control that it gave her. Paul could be broken further. Taya could get more. She could get anything that she wanted from him. Where can I find Robert, Paul? She took a moment to stare deeply into Paul's eyes as tears finally trickled down his cheeks. The rich aren't as easily searched. You know that. I need an address. I won't. Can't do that. Paul trembled. He'll have me. Paul's scream dwarfed the sound of the glass shattering in his hands. Leaving a cold, sterile home, Taya took a moment to regain her breath, ragged as it was. She leaned against the closed front door, mind balancing somewhere between another panic attack and exhilaration, because she literally just beat this guy and harmed him. We're going to learn how much she harmed him later. Quote, grounding herself, Taya took several long breaths, counting how many red things that she could see on the blocks outside of Paul's apartment. She wiped her washed hands on her pants, making sure that she'd gotten off all the blood. I can do this. Straightening while pushing down the need to vomit, she rang Oscar. She felt the need to spit into a plastic bush lining the townhomes. Have you guys ever had to like fight against an anxiety attack while you had just tortured the crap out of somebody, and then just like felt really bad that your abuser is having a bit of a hard time after they just like attacked you for no reason other than their own sick enjoyment. Like, she freaking Stubbs needs to know who his friend is, because if he's gonna go, I think Quinn is a bad person and he's sadistic, I got news for you, Stubbs. I got news for you. And I hate this even more because it's trying to teeter between being an abject sadist who is just fine beating the shit out of someone and an ooh, small bean, I'm having a panic attack, mental illness. Boo, 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 boo. At least finish the scene. Let the adrenaline wear off and then have the panic attack about just how far you went because you're thinking of this little girl. Or find something that's actually going to make her panic over it. This doesn't really make her look better or lighten the brutality of her actions to claim that she is having a panic attack after torturing somebody that didn't even do anything wrong. She's not sympathetic. And this looks more like it's desperately trying to appeal to the reader with like, hey, look, Taya's not so bad. She panics just like you. But she's just a bad guy. Anyway, she leaves Paul's place after psychotically torturing him and crying at it the entire time. Can you imagine? Tell me the answers. And having to confront him about the changed security tape that was set up. Paul said that he didn't have any answers about any of that or who that was behind that or why that was done. He was just hired to do a job. She now calls Oscar the vampire to talk about the falsified footage, which was the footage she got to see while she went to the bar. Oscar then gives her more direction, telling her that she might get info from the den on floor number 4, and the den is a place, or the dens are places where the weirdos of society that no one wants to run into meet up and do things. She admires the plants around her. Quote, wiping the sweat from her face, Taya admired the genuine trees under the community-funded lamps. Each seemed to be just barely clinging to life, with the megastructure provided with just enough to continue surviving. Ads claimed that there were all kinds of health benefits from living near a real tree. The slogan proper oxygen alongside the small seed mascot, the board playing in her system, punched into her brain, the board playing in her system as she continued to stare at the green foliage. Get something done. If Taya had expected to be at home with any regularity, she would have ordered the advertised starter kit. Having a real greenery in her home, no matter how small, seemed extremely pleasant. A new project to distract her was shamefully welcome. If she remembered correctly, an ad that she'd seen a few weeks back claimed having even fake plants in your home was good for your mental health. Would they not want plants just for the oxygen? How do they maintain the oxygen in this place with, like, do they have some kind of carbon dioxide to oxygen generator that's a cyberpunk thing? That's a technology thing. And for the record, she's currently talking to Oscar because he was set up to be the killer in the case with Mrs. Carlson, but Taya didn't kill him because she second-guessed that he was guilty of anything. Why they are now having a phone call relationship, I don't know. I don't remember it being established that they were closer. It kind of just, she visited Oscar the same way she visited Paul, except she didn't torture Oscar. I guess that now means that you're friends, whatever. Oscar and Taya then trade theories about rich boy Robert Labor. Quote, Taya turned the corner into a far more populated street. It provided a feeling of safety that she didn't know she needed. If it was covering for a friend, he'd bow out and not double down when things go wrong. He's probably a shit, but I doubt that he's a hardened criminal. I'm guessing that we're dealing with a scared egomaniac with a lot of resources covering his own ass. My guess is Rob invested in a club, something happened to Nita in the club, and if it was discovered, it would ruin Robert's business endeavor. Not a lot of people want to party in the same building where a kid died. Recently, anyway. Interesting take. Oscar paused, then cautioned, he also could have killed the kid himself. In that case, he'll go scorched earth to keep it hidden. I mean, he's already sent a twitchy-fingered enforcer to commit an additional murder. Despite how little they seem to know each other and how they met, because Taya was supposed to kill him, she keeps insulting him. Oscar invites Taya to crash at his place for her safety. She still keeps insulting him. He throws insults back, specifically at the cops, and then complains that he is allowed to throw stuff around since they live with a pay-to-protect police force. But we've also already established that the police and the thugs are separate, theoretically, but they're also constantly referred to as the same, but they're also separate. I don't know. If all of the police forces pay for protection, then that would just mean that all crime is allowed so long as there aren't any cops that are hired as personal bodyguards to take you down. How long has this been going on, and are they all used to it? Because this doesn't seem like something that you'd complain about like this if it has been the norm for your entire lifetime. Taya then says that she needs money and that she is not going to be able to pay Oscar's friends to protect her. And then Oscar is also like, yeah, I'm broke. And Taya's out here laughing like, who has ever heard of a broke blood dealer? I mean, he's dealing in fake blood. That might just mean that there are more vampires eating humans than eating his pack blood. Taya also tells Oscar about Helga's Alice in Wonderland tattoo because that's peculiar as well. Oscar is then describing the hunger that a vampire feels. Quote, feeding runs deep in instinct, closer to drinking water. The hunger, you can't escape it. It follows you into your dreams. The taste of the world turns to ash and the light dims. All you hear is a pulsing heart of those around you, the drums of life. Once you give in, the ecstasy you experience, the destruction, the consumption of the life of another is incredible. You pull their heat, power, and potential. Eventually, they come to some kind of understanding, trusting each other enough to agree to work together long term to get to the bottom of this case. Because Oscar says he wants to know who framed him, but we find out that there is more behind this than that. Well, Oscar asks around shops to try to get more leads on like where to look to next about this Alice in Wonderland vampire. Taya is not doing anything to pursue her own goals and is instead going to the gym to spar in order to deal with her anxiety. Her dad randomly calls her because it's mom's death anniversary. Don't count on him coming up again at all because he doesn't. Nothing of value is said, and then she passes out on the train to a naughty commercial playing to her annoyance. Taya wakes up at the end of the line and is shooed off by a robot. She's been on there for apparently like 2 hours. She goes to a nearby diner and thinks about how desperately she needs money. Her solution? Quote, the only way to get that kind of money fast was through kill contracts. High-value kill contracts, which meant vampires. Taya grimaced. She knew someone who dealt in kill contracts, just not someone she wanted to be associated with, making it all the harder to make a moral compromise with herself to take a life, even a dead one. Oh, haha. So now we have morals. She was literally just torturing a dude. She's a friggin' thug. And now she's like, well, I don't know, kill contracts, killing a vampire might be a little far. Again, I don't feel like this character has an actual personality or like moral values of any kind, even if they're like gray morals. She doesn't stand for anything. And yet at the same time, she's supposed to like not have this bias against vampires because that's the righteous thing to do instead of like changing her personality or learning better as she interacts with Oscar and sees that Oscar is not the monster that she's just brought up to believe vampires to be, that vampires retain some part of their humanity if they allow themselves. Like there is nothing here. And she's like, oh, well, now I care about killing vampires, but you don't care about torture. Really? She just stands for nothing. That's what comes across, is she stands for nothing. Juno ends up coming to the diner because she's been stalking Taya since Taya was on the train for 2 hours and she noticed the homing beacon. And Juno apparently is just connected to Taya's system, period. So she knows where she is at all times. And pokes on about what Taya has discovered in her investigation. You know, the one that Taya said was dangerous and to keep her distance from. And Taya offers no resistance to the questioning, you know, that this might be a little bit dangerous. Juno is here to make sure that Taya is not going to go and do something stupid that'll get her hurt. But I think it's too late for that already. I mean, there's no stopping Tay. Also, there is whatever this is. Quote, Juno finally broke it. How goes sniffing up the family money tree? What? Family tree made of money? Juno clarified. Sorry, bad joke. Just popped in my head. Anywho, how goes the case? The frick was that? How is family money tree not clear? How is that even a joke? It's so bad, and I don't think it realizes it. Meanwhile, Taya's having a meltdown that she doesn't even know what this case is anymore. Very, very different than how it was with Oscar, and the panic that she feels now comes from nowhere. I get that she has a different relationship with Juno, but this is like a 180 on this entire case because of how much panic she's suddenly feeling when she's been like nose to the ground the entire time and like, I'm gonna be a badass and hurt people. Because Taya is having a meltdown. Now Sugar Plum Princess Flower Girl Juno over here is pushing Taya to get herself together and asking a bunch of questions to help get her together. Because this is happening instead of her being like, see, I really think you should get out of this job. It's just like Juno is the one to center Taya because she can't responsibly do her own thing. Quote, I just know Robert is responsible. No, you don't, Taya. There was no accusation in Juno's voice, only understanding. Stop thinking like this is one path forward. All you know for sure is that you've gathered pieces of a puzzle. You haven't even connected anything solidly outside of glimpses here and there. Just because something could fit doesn't mean that the picture is complete. Until you have hard evidence, assume people are lying or not giving you the whole truth. Nodding, Taya said, nice use of the puzzle imagery. You're better than Quinn. So Juno's the voice of reason, manhandling Taya's ego and also pushing her along. This feels so forced and insincere in the way of a conversation. Juno tells Taya that she better sleep and assures her that she'll be on campus where even the most richest of rich politicians can't reach you without registration with the campus. BT dubs, the campus is literally just the highest floor in this entire tower. I don't know why the entire floor is a campus. Is it one campus or is it like multiple campuses? We don't get into that. We just learn that the top floor is university floor. But also, tisk tisk, Juno. That's dumb. You know that they can pay people to get in there one way or another. I really, really question how the most richest leadership members of the entirety of society cannot somehow just get onto the university floor. Because they're rich and celebrities. The two separate, and Taya retires to Oscar's house. She's saying things like she's been there before, but as far as I can recall, since she's like, I've been here before, and it's like, now that I actually have a moment to slow down, I can look at the furniture, unlike last time. Considering the story tends to get lost in itself in the descriptions, it feels like I'm missing something here, but again, she looked up his home address and talked about investigating him next, but I don't actually recall her going inside when she looked up his house address. Anyway, he lays down ground rules to say stay out of his way while he's doing business and no drawing weapons inside of his house. Quinn calls to check on her, knowing that she's not at home, worried about her, and Taya is not sharing anything. Then she falls asleep. When she wakes up, Oscar is talking to someone named Boers, who is promised to be given live human blood in exchange for rent, not this bagged shite. Taya intervenes and calls them out on what they're doing, then asks how much rent is for Oscar before paying it all. Note, we're not even given an amount, we're just told that it is shockingly low and that she pays it off. When Taya is already said that she is so poor, and we have seen her account in a couple of chapters saying that she has tens of thousands of dollars in her account, this just reads vague for the sake of vague. And again, another thing that is just not concretely decided because this book doesn't have an identity and it couldn't be bothered to form a world that makes sense. Like, is tens of thousands not that much? We don't know. We don't know what anything is worth. She just goes up and down arbitrary numbers when she buys mods. Quote, how much is Oscar's rent? Taya asked. The answer was shockingly low. Taya pulled up her account and sent 2 months' worth over to Boers. Boers accepted the payment. Oscar, how'd you meet her? She bad as fuck. Paying your debt and shit. After the guy leaves and Oscar and Taya settle in, Oscar spills the beans on the truth about vampires in this world. Quote, after another moment of uncomfortable silence, Oscar continues, why humanity lives in megastructures, what happened on Mars, what caused my condition, all of that is known and kept hidden, controlled. Are you trying to start a political discussion with me? Taya had never considered herself much for strong opinions on these subjects, but Oscar clearly felt at odds with something that she'd said. I know that I've said some things about vampires that could be considered rude, but I don't really mean to diminish any of your personal beliefs. No, God, this is always hard. Oscar ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. Screw it, here it goes. Magic is real. I don't have a virus, it's a blood curse. A curse started by the now dead god. Its remains are on Mars. That's actually what they found. But that's not the point. I'm telling you this because I know a witch. I swear on my life, a cauldron-using witch. She'll be able to track down Helga, but to make it work, we need your blood. What? Oscar says most vampires don't even know that they're cursed by a dead god, which begs the question, how the frick Oscar knows? Because this isn't just common knowledge. Is it just because the witch told him and the witch knows? How did he get this information? How is he not spreading this information? How many other people have this information? How is he not sharing it, at least within his own community, especially to Martel, who is the one that talks for all of them to the news? And the government/rich people are hiding the existence of a dead god on Mars? Taya doesn't believe Oscar, winks at him, and then leaves in this really awkward way. Immediately, she's calling up a case manager for Mercs so that she can get on some assassinations, which, lovingly, other enforcers call kill contracts. I don't know where it makes sense. Quote, enforcers were tools of the rich to use as they pleased and for the middle class to hire if they could afford it. An enforcer license provided countless benefits, but the more Taya sat on the roll in a wider scheme of it all, the fouler the taste in her mouth. Regardless, it had provided her with experience and tools that she was more than willing to utilize. She's always known that she was a thug for hire. And all of a sudden now she's like, wait a second, this is bad. What? I get people like waking up to the situations that they have just believed to be correct, but at what point did she ever think that being a freaking thug was bad? That she was not part of this system of empowering rich people to take advantage of poor people. Like, she has not woken up to this yet. She has not been told to go and do something to a poor person and then like beat them and then had a come to Jesus moment. Kind of like, you know, Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2 when he's going around collecting money for the moneylender, and then he eventually realizes, I mean, you could make choices to determine which way he goes, but he starts like realizing what he is doing is wrong and he's not for it, and you get to see that change in his character. And depending on the choices you make, you also get to see him like trying to repent in whatever way that he actually can with what he has left. Like, you can have somebody just enforcing and like taking and then run into the correct case that makes it click, or, you know, get tuberculosis and make it click. But Taya hasn't had that. Taya hasn't had that moment to switch off from being a complete psychopath. You get these guys with the manners that she's getting the jobs from. Quote, the bounty dealer's avatar looked openly amused as it chomped down on a fat cut of meat. The meat on the plate never shrank, no matter how hungrily the manager sliced into it. This is not for you, kid. You're no hitman, sorry, hitwoman. Person who deals in death. You know what I mean. Yeah, you ain't that shit. I don't know why we're assuming this. What about her? Other than, like, obviously looking at a pretty girl and being like, yeah, you don't kill. But then she's just gonna whoop, whoop. Also, it's just opulence to be eating freaking CGI steak. But, like, there is nothing about eating a freaking CGI steak that says you have money. Like, it is so stupid to just, I have this avatar that is just, like, raining down money on me. Bro, my steak never runs out. Bro is clearly a feminist, even if he kills people. So, you know, he do so equally, right? He don't got no problems with killing men or women. Like, all of the others she's interacted with, Taya is antagonizing this guy too, even though she wants stuff from him and he's higher up on the pole. Quote, you wouldn't cross me, girl. Off the rails, right, Thomas? I don't give a shit about having a professional relationship with you. I care about getting paid. I'd think that getting paid means having a professional relationship of some kind. The bounty dealer gets Taya to tell him about the trouble that she's in and then laughs at her for it because he's recorded her sounding desperate and he can use it to point at her as a liability. He makes her promise to do 2 jobs for him in the future and he'll help her out. She demands to be paid upfront $100,000, which he does. He is literally the one that is blackmailing her right now. Why is he giving her money when he's got the blackmail materials and she is the one in need in 2 different situations now? She needs the job and she needs the reputation. She calls Oscar about some vampire named Gavin Butler. And now, while Oscar is doing that kind of work, Taya is going to go to her favorite person, Naomi's place. And it's kind of funny how Naomi hasn't come up once so far, despite the introduction to her saying that she is Taya's favorite person. Here is her introduction. Quote, it took her over 2 hours, but getting to Naomi's shop, no matter the distance, was always worth it to Taya. She was welcomed by the store's neon, shaped into a T-Rex with assault rifles for arms. Below the dinosaur was the name Small Arms. It was Taya's personal favorite name for the store and the entire structure. Ghost! Naomi shouted as Taya entered their store, their hoarse voice deeply inviting. Naomi was medium height and covered in lean muscle. Tattoos were visible on nearly every inch of exposed skin. Everything from simple glow-line pattern to a photorealistic portrait of Naomi's mother that perpetually shimmered with a mild glow. Naomi's standout piece, though, was a ringlet of powerful sunlight glow acting as a crown on their temple, complemented by the white dots covering that natural freckle sparkles under Naomi's acorn-colored skin. Everything about Naomi was bold and warm, and she was always someone that Taya could be honest with without needing to bring up any pain. Considering that Taya feels that way about Naomi, you would think that she'd have brought her up sooner, for all of the emotional stuff that she's got going on. But not a single note was said about Naomi before this. Also, is it just me or does this person sound oddly familiar? Quote, "Damn," Naomi snapped fingers before unlocking a cabinet near the register. The beauty of Naomi's service largely came from their ability to provide something extra special for any given need. Naomi loved their industry and wanted to make each customer as happy as possible. Taya appreciated their enthusiasm, though she had made Naomi promise not to rant about how the right to own a weapon was a fundamental part of whatever. "You're, looking a bit out of it. Well, honestly, you look like shit. Everything okay?" Can't quite put my finger on what is standing out to me right now. Naomi runs a gun shop and sells Taya some firearms after they test out a couple and practice shooting vampires. Taya pays for her guns and catches up with Oscar, who says that he can't find any information on this guy named Gavin Butler, and then she heads to floor 8 to look for Gavin Butler, thinking only a little bit about how she'll take kill contracts on vampires because they don't count as people. Also, as usual, since she's heading to work, she gets high. She can't help but want to get high literally all of the time, I swear. You'd think that in a life or death situation, that, when she's taking on an assassination, she'd want to be fully aware of her surroundings, especially once she blamed herself for Mrs. Carlson's death and her inability to chase down Nita on her highness, but she's not going to reflect on her drug usage at all, especially not when working. It doesn't seem like a good idea, and it doesn't make any sense. She investigates the floor, finds Gavin having a bit of a lady snack in the hallway, if you will. Not kosher, not a good idea, probably should be in privacy. Taya and Gavin fight, she kills him. Oscar finds out that this is what Taya wanted information for and is pissed that she would go after a vampire. So while Martell and them are on television saying, hey, don't punish all vampires for the bad acts of some vampires, the vampires are still going to get mad when they're not policing their own who are feasting on humans. And then if you take out a murderer, they're going to be like, but that was a vampire. How dare you? He was a murderer, okay? Whether he was human or not, generally people of some kind of mental abilities are going to see a murderer and be like, we need to stop him, even if we're all humans here. But these vampires have no ability to be like, that vampire was murdering people, did not want to stop. We got to do something about that. No, they just get mad at anybody who wants to put a stop to these vampires who are unwilling to change. Obviously, punishment would not happen. So you're building a case against yourself, having freedoms. Taya is like, I knew that you wouldn't like the plan. And Oscar's like, your plan is just to kill people who fall into temptation for money? She's overwhelmed by the drop of another $200K into her bank account because, quote, Taya nearly gagged, but froze when her balance reading flickered into $211,102. The transaction fee had been substantial, but Taya hadn't seen so much money in her account in years. It was enough for a down payment on a premium ad blocker. If Taya got one installed, her monthly expenses would plummet. No more impulse purchases or paying for a few minutes of peace. Learning some impulse control might also help her daily costs if her biggest thing is buying things that are on annoying ads. Now, after that battle scene, she's going to go back to Stubbs to look her over because he's not only her technician, he's also her doctor. A brief aside here, she says that she gets ads straight into her brain, 40% into this book, and we don't have any world building for that. How does it happen? We're going to get into this a little bit more with the comments at the end, where I talk about different things that this could affect, but we're not going to get any reason for why or how they get ads directly into their brains. We don't know if it comes through their cybernetic eyes, if it was part of getting cybernetic eyes, if it is a chip in the brain, where the chip comes from, who's in charge of the chip that does this. And we can already say, we already know she has organic eyes because that has to do with the glow that she put into her eyes. This book is not cyberpunk. Okay, at this point, if it's not obvious, it's just not. It is fantasy, it is future fantasy that takes aesthetics from cyberpunk, but it is just future fantasy. where everything is run by religious zealots, and the biggest thing has to do with vampires. At Stubbs, he fixes Taya up, and then she insists that she is going to get some more upgrades because she has money now. Stubbs is like, you could make some better decisions with your money, and Taya's like, nah fam, I'm investing in me. Think of what my job is. She gets changed into a hospital gown for the surgery and says, quote, Taya began to strip down with Stubbs's help. Oscar politely turned away, prude, becoming fascinated with the prop from some sci-fi show. This is a nitpick, but this bothers the heck out of me because, again, Taya is just being aggressive for no reason. What's the problem here with someone being a little bit more modest or providing privacy to someone who is getting naked? You don't need to shame someone for turning their back to not see you nude, but this constantly happens. And maybe I'm sensitive to it because it's happened in my comments section a lot for just being like, I don't want to see sex. But everybody's like, you need to see sex. We need to force it on you. But it doesn't hurt anyone else when someone prefers modesty, when they turn their back to not look at you naked. Whether it makes them uncomfortable, whether it's for personal reasons of some kind, nobody loses from that. This aside wasn't necessary, and while Taya is fine to be as much of a jerk as she wants to be, she's not ingratiated at all. I freaking hate her guts, and everything she seems to do is to make the reader dislike her more. It's not badass to just freaking be a dick to everybody. It's just such an unnecessary comment to be aggressive on something that doesn't even matter. He's not even being rude about it. She just prefers to shame people into sexual behavior that she deems appropriate rather than just letting people live the lives they choose to live. Taya learns that vamps had augmentations at some point. Then she is put under. Now, how vampires are allowed to legally get augmentations when it just makes them stronger in a world that hates them, I don't know. I didn't think that they had human rights, so then, like, they wouldn't have to be given augmentations. So they can get illegal augmentations, but then you would think that'd be, like, immediate arrest and imprisonment or execution or something just to keep you safe because you're already superpowered. We don't need a superpowered robot bloodsucker. She hangs out with Juno in Juno's consciousness now since she has been put under anesthetic, and she is in this avatar's home zone on the beach again, sans ads, because you can get away from the ads in your mental space, and she just sleeps in peaceful unconsciousness, before the two women wake up and chit-chat, telling each other how much they love each other, and then waiting for Stubbs to wake her up. Glad that invasive medical procedures can be so pleasant in the future. When the procedure is over, she is woken up by Oscar and informs us that Juno gets a ping every time Taya passes out, which is why Juno is always there when Taya goes to sleep, because then Juno exits out of whatever she's doing in real life to go and meet Taya in Dreamland. Enter this random aside, quote, "You got at my heart?" Taya got to her feet. An overwhelming urge to urinate settled in her stomach. Hold that thought, actually. So now we learn that urine is not kept in the balls, or when it's not kept in the balls, it's kept in your stomach. In the bathroom, she gets a call from Quinn saying that they found the girl Nita and she is dead. Taya breaks down, and apparently her final words, Taya breaks down. Apparently the last words that her husband/ex-fiance said to her was, "You're useless." So did he not love her then? Did he blame her for his dying of cancer? What is this? Like, we're going to have this relationship where she's like, I love him, but he was always a dick to me, but I took care of him when he was dying and on cancer and in bed. It's just arbitrary drama, arbitrary aggression in this relationship, where again, it doesn't feel like the author understands what it is he is doing here. Because all of this time, I'd gotten the impression that they actually liked each other. And now it's, oh, now he's going to insult me to make me feel inferior when I already feel low. Can you just not throw random stuff in here? Can you just let the man die in freaking peace and then just let it be that instead of making him suddenly an abusive person after death when it seemed fine before? She asks how the girl died, and Quinn says bite marks, blood was drained, and it's all gone. She asks if she can see the body, and Quinn says no. She's relieved because she didn't want to see the body, but then she immediately assumes that the bite marks are fake and it was all a setup. Why? She literally just hunted down a vampire who was caught in the middle of drinking a person. So why would you just already assume that it wasn't a vampire who sucked on this child? She knows that vampires are still dangerous to humans. How can she already just assume that it was fake, other than it being implanted by the author that, hey, she just knows the facts? It still could have been a setup with the girl being nabbed and then dumped with vampires so that the vampires could dispose of the body while the girl was, useless. But it still could have been a vampire did actually bite her. Why is she assuming this when she also keeps jumping back and forth between vampires are inhuman, I can kill them just fine, and no way, I gotta defend the vampire under mensch. She asserts that Robert Labor has to be behind this, and that Robert Labor is doing a cover-up that Quinn has to know about. Taya's first told that she is off the case, but once she brings up Labor, she is told that she'll get a call if there is anything else that she can help with, but if Labor is involved, then it's over Quinn's head. Quote, Taya hesitated, unsure of if she could push her luck any further without setting off Quinn's alarms. Still, she asked, and if more evidence comes out pointing to the Labor family? There was a long pause as Quinn considered his next words. Then I'd be an idiot to pull that thread. So I'd hand it over to ISPD, and they'd have a chance at getting results. And you can live with that? Taya asked. Yeah, I can. The lines in Quinn's face seemed to somehow deepen. God, I used to be like you. I wanted to make things good, you know? Didn't want to be some fucking asshole making up stories like my dad. It's why I joined the Hayes Corps. Got sent into the Green Death. I was eager to hunt for signs of surviving life. You know what I found, Taya? Not a fucking thing. Mind-numbing nothing. Rotten hills and barren mountains of rocks. The dirt was acidic, the ocean still as death. Spent years of my fucking life walking in heavy armor, trying to convince myself if I was doing something good. Then I realized what the Hayes Corps is. It's a lie. A comfort that we spent billions on pretending that we might find some trace of hope that we'll be able to look up at blue skies one day. Worst part was when I moved back into this fucking structure, realized no one even cared about that lie anymore. This plot point just feels stupid and forced. Quinn ultimately tells her that fighting the status quo is worthless and she should back off before she finds out what happens if you don't. Then he hangs up. Taya returns to Stubbs/Oscar, where she learns that Oscar was there for the entire surgery, and Stubbs is like, lol, he's crushing on you, I hope you know. Again, Oscar has zero response to this because none of these people are actually present in the story. Oscar has now magically received info on Helga, the chick with the tattoo, and she is a missing member of the Labor family, reborn as a vampire. Yes, she is the dead wife who faked her own death, as I said earlier. As discussion continues, we learn that reborn is, quote, respectful version of biter or vampire. So why is she using honorifics of sorts with this woman? Also, Taya shows that she has zero understanding of how adoption works when she says, quote, Robert's not even her biological kid. Would she help him cover up Nita's murder? Not being a biological kid doesn't stop someone from considering you to be their kid and caring for you all the same, Taya. I know that your parents probably don't care about you when you are their biological kid, so I don't get why it's so difficult for you to, imagine. Also, Mrs. Carlson had adopted Nita, and you believed that Mrs. Carlson actually cared about Nita to some extent. So, why is it all of a sudden that we're going, oh, but how could she care? She was adopted. He was adopted. Girl. We need to talk about, what you know. Taya then tells Oscar and Stubbs that Nita's body was found. She's dead and it looks like she was killed by a vampire. Taya would really make a terrible enforcer as she just keeps spilling cop investigation information with civilians while the case is ongoing. This is what we call contamination. So if this system works at all like the current American justice investigation system, if you contaminate a witness, if you contaminate a possible suspect, that kind of destroys your case and you can't try somebody because now they are unreliable as to whether they knew that stuff or not. You're not supposed to share internal information with external people with an ongoing investigation. Sarah/Helga faked her death to get out of her bad marriage of this guy who was way older than her and a bad guy. How they even got married in the first place, I don't know. Why they got married in the first place, I don't know. What was in it for her, I don't know. And she changed her face with implants, which is how no one has recognized her all of this time. Fun fact, implanting tech into your body to change your genetic makeup is somehow easier to do than basic plastic surgery in this world. Quote, her face had changed more than a simple turning would justify. Work like that, for us, requires complex surgeries with rare implants, an abhorrent process to put oneself through, but it's the reason why she looks so different. More different. This just sounds so forced, like it needed a reason for why, instead of just changing things earlier on. It doesn't matter if you change your face, if you have an easily recognizable freaking Alice in Wonderland tattoo. Are you kidding me? We also learned that it's been 20 years since she died, and she's a vampire now. I'm wondering how she hasn't killed her ex-husband at this point when she is a vampire and she can just sneak in and him off because it doesn't feel like the story has done a good enough job of showing the reader what's going on. Taya explains it to the men. Quote, taking a deep breath, Taya stated her first solid theory. Here is what we know for sure. Nita was taken at or around Donkoma by someone Robert was willing to cover for, possibly even himself. He is the younger brother of the convicted Stuart Labor and the son of an energy mogul and crusader nutjob James Labor. The long-lost stepmother of a fucked-up kid has come out of hiding and warns me off of the case after I was sent down a bad lead by one of Robert's employees, or Robert himself. Safe to say, Robert is in communication with his stepmother, no? How else would she have learned so quickly? We also know that Sarah, also known as Helga, turned into a vampire to escape her husband or whole family. No, we don't. This time it was Oscar's turn to answer. She could have been turned against her will and been forced into fleeing an anti-biter family. They could have turned on her. Public image is everything to this type. I wouldn't put it past them to try to bury her. Literally. It's not like James is known for his loving legacy. Stuart testified to his father's beatings at trial. It's just coming off as the author telling the reader what they want them to believe so that they can mislead them rather than just letting the story speak for itself. We have literally zero investigation on Robert. They keep just drawing lines in order to say that Robert has probably molested Nita because, of course, every bad guy's a molester. Stubbs now says something about cutting to the chase, and Taya is now snapping, that's how you get yourself hurt and get things wrong, as if she hasn't been jumping to conclusions this entire time. They agree that they need more information as all they can guess is that Helga is talking to Robert, so they're gonna sneak their way close, point a gun, and get info. I don't know why we suddenly have a lot of internal arguing about whether or not Taya wants to trust a vampire when she's been doing it already, but it's mentioned again, quote, is it really not just a virus? What did he claim? A dead god on Mars? Oscar, you better not be fucking insane. We didn't even ask questions about that when it came up in the first place. She just believes everything. Stubbs is now accusing Quinn of also being a POS that shouldn't be trusted, and that he is likely in on this to set Taya up on this job, knowing that she'd hopefully follow through and just shoot the vampire without asking questions, but she didn't. And because it's not enough to be shady, quote, honestly, I like you less for working with him. When you two came in here together, whenever I finish work on him and you go under, he becomes an absolute ass. Talks about everything that he gets away with because of his fucking badge. Do better, Taya. He's scum. Gotta prove that they are just the worst. Can't have any character unassassinated if they're not part of the main party. Just wait until somebody else falls out of favor and then we start passing rumors about them. Also, how is Taya any better? We're forgetting that Taya's not any better, so if she wasn't the main character and she fell out of style, she'd be next. I hate the whole mindset of having a character get assassinated by someone when they're not the main. You're either all good or you're all bad. And if you're considered all good, you do all the same things as the all bad characters, but nobody points it out, nobody references it, nobody responds to it, unless it's to say that you are just a cool badass for it. But otherwise, it goes unnoticed. Oscar doesn't have nuance, Stubbs doesn't have nuance, Juno doesn't have nuance, Taya doesn't have nuance. None of them have nuance. It's actually a very childish way to look at people. She pays her bills to Stubbs, sends Oscar out, and then talks to Stubbs, who confronts her about being an asshole because she is bad at dealing with trauma. Maybe that's also Quinn's excuse. Can we say that he is not such a bad guy? He might be dealing with trauma. He's a little bit older than Taya. He's seen some shit. That's all I'm going to say. Stubbs says that he won't be a part of Taya's self-destructive behavior, which is a lie. He's not actually drawing boundaries on her right now. This just all builds up to her telling him that she lost her fiancé, and then they immediately move on. The emotional depth in this story is like so shallow that you could not even wash a baby in it. They declare themselves friends, so Taya doesn't have to pay him to update a motorcycle for her to use, or even, he's just gonna let her run off with his motorcycle. Told you that he wasn't serious about setting boundaries. She goes out to Oscar now to get things settled, and Oscar is just praising her. Quote, Oscar's expression grew serious. I find working with you provides immense value. I haven't gotten to know you particularly well, but I would like to. You're intense. Seems like someone who could be useful to know, especially if things get worse. The two of them flirt as they walk away together. So now we're going to get into this metro to profile people while also ball washing for Oscar. Quote, it fascinated me how consistent the reactions to Oscar were, depending on the stereotype of those around her. The man in the expensive suit with no visible glow, so openly avoided acknowledging Oscar pressed up against him. He might as well have stared. A boy just entering his teen years with worn clothes and glow already decorating his wrists nodded to the vampire with a chummy smile. A mother with a bag worth more than Taya had ever had in her account pulled her son aggressively away when she noticed the dead man and came as close to running to the other side of the car as she could. It wasn't entirely consistent. One well-dressed man in shades, seemingly unbothered by Oscar, reading some feed on his display pad inches from the biter. But 9 times out of 10, class seemed to dictate the mentality toward the undead. To his credit, Oscar paid no mind at all to them and spent all of his time asking Taya about her life. She patiently answered what she was willing and stared silently when he prodded too deep. He took her cues and tactfully moved on to other topics. The highlight of the ride, though, for Taya was when Oscar shifted for an elderly woman looking for a seat. She accidentally fell into the vampire. Oscar instinctively reached out for the support bar and was visibly repulsed when his hand stuck on something dry to the seal. Guys, we need to rethink vampire rights because he gave up his seat for an old lady. He is one of the good ones. Please. Bloodsuckers save grannies. They get to the lower floor of number 2, which is lower than Taya has ever been before. There are no ads here. It is so quiet from a commercial standpoint, and it is literally 3 times as populated as the upper floors, which is like, how is it so quiet when it is so populated? Also, she is learning everything is much cheaper down here than on the upper floors, and the import fees that are up there are lies. Now they get to the real reason that they've come down to this floor, to meet the witch named Jordan. Quote, there was a naked, pale woman floating in the store. To Taya's amazement, she hovered in the exact middle of the space, skinny legs crossed and even skinnier arms splayed wide. Her blue hair had a matte coloring and was cut sharply at the chin. It contrasted sharply with ruby red lips resting in a flat expression of consternation. Her angular face was highlighted with smeared shadow around her closed eyes. A long Roman nose hung low on the woman's face, but what many faces would struggle to overcome, the petite woman wore beautifully well. A single glow tattoo of a Western tapin, as Taya had identified it, spiraled down the woman's arm from shoulder to wrist. The amount of standard non-glowing ink rivaled Naomi's. Symbols Taya's AI failed to identify were scattered along the woman's arms and ribs, complemented by a collar of flame tracing a prominent collarbone. A constellation of stars decorated the side of Jordan's right breast. Everything about the chaos adorning the woman's body seemed taken to an extreme, including the fact that she was floating, nude, in the middle of the store with shelved walls stacked to the top with a mixture of print glass bottles containing odd colors and honest-to-God thriving plants. The greenery was almost as shocking to Taya as the floating woman. The gnarled twigs and leaves under the lamps glistened as misters released their spray all along the walls. Vines from the few of the denser containers spilled over and onto the floor and over the shoulders of the hulking pale mannequin. Taya's eyes widened as she watched the vines suddenly whip up and snatch a mouse scurrying across the floor. The branch pulled the creature back into the dense foliage, where the squeaking ended with a harsh snap. Okay, I'm wondering, we're in this building. Where are the vermin growing? Did they not all get extinct by the smog outside? There were a bunch in this building already that kind of just lived and grown, and they don't interfere with any of the wildlife there, or any of the city life there. Not only that, but we're not going to have Oscar responding to the nudity of the witch, which maybe he was more responding to the fact that he's attracted to Taya in the other place. But also question, when all of the air down here is insanely toxic to the point that they're all wearing masks all the time because it is so much smog, how does she have thriving plant life? Because it is mentioned that the random people down here all wear masks, or many of them wear masks, because the closer you are to the ground, the more toxic the air is in general, and it is so bad. Does she have an air filter in her office, building, whatever? Why doesn't the rest of the floor have these air filters to deal with the stuff and instead have to use masks to deal with the smog? Especially considering she just described disposable masks. This just feels like a leftover trauma from freaking 2020, because I'm not getting how this is working. Unless you want to, like, do your masks have filters? Is that special filters for this? We're not establishing anything. And then you've got the fact that this opens up so many questions, like how common are witches? Did anybody else on this floor know that this witch is here? Do the riches know of the witches? Why isn't this service being used to purify the rest of the floor? The one that has to do with like purifying the air. Why isn't this witch being used to make more collections in the churches by this religious cult society that could say she's a high priestess who is super blessed by the gods? The witch kisses Taya, and it sounds like they're merging. Quote, bone connected to bone. Violet's eyes blended with blue. The horrible sensation of melting became distant. All that was left was the sensation of one. Taya was consumed by something horribly right, beautifully wrong, a soul pressed into her body, mingling with her own. She gets sucked into an illusion of her husband where they have sex, and he apologizes for how he was at the end. He felt like a burden to her. She comes out of her dream state, to the witch still kissing her. When asking what happened, the witch says, magic. It turns out that the husband that she dreamed of was truly her husband and not just some projection or avatar caused by the witch. The witch had actually sent her into the next life to meet with her husband. That is supposed to be the proof that she is actually a witch, because if she had just said she was a witch, then it was unlikely that this chick would actually believe her. So she always uses some kind of magic to convince people that she is what she says she is. We now have this witch who orchestrated the Crusaders killing each other. Biggest apparent news story of the year, and it's the first time we're hearing about it. It wasn't on any of the news stations when Taya has turned on the news throughout this book. Somehow, it's supposed to be impressive, but it hasn't come up. Not even with the way security behaves on any of these floors. Like, there is no security changing floors, despite them knowingly having vampires, having freaking killings orchestrated amongst the political parties, and witches, and the pores trying to get out where the other people are, and terrorists, because we're also going to learn about their terrorists. The term Reaper comes up, though we don't know what it means because nothing is said about it. And then Taya asks the witch about faith, quote, so if I buy into this, I guess atheism is out the window? Taya tried to match Jordan's friendly demeanor. A thought occurred to her. Are vampires really possessed by demons? I'm agnostic, I guess. Hard not to be in my field of work. The more I learn, it feels like the less I know sometimes. But the lack of knowledge means that I can try things a bit blindly. Counterintuitive, but as long as I can handle the fallout, new discoveries are abundant. Jordan turned, knife in one hand and several vials with brightly colored fluid within them in the other. She thought before answering Taya's second question. Now, vampires, it's not what you think. Demons aren't all evil, or our understanding of evil. Basically, everything religion has told us about the other side of good is just a bit off. It's a simplification of powers that have existed for longer than we can even comprehend. None of it is as simple as good and evil. Demons are immortal. Their motivations reflect that. Because humanity thinks entirely differently, sometimes their actions seem evil to us. But understand that there are two minds within vampires, more literally than human. The immortal possessors and the human remnants. Demons don't control vampires, but they influence them on how they think. Understand? I am not surprised that a witch says that demons aren't evil, but she is also proving that the politicians are correct and the public is correct. If you go back to the conversation that Martell was having with the AI person earlier on, and the public generally thought that vampires were demon possessed and they were evil, this is basically confirming that they are not off about that. And so, like, I don't see how this disproves the prejudices that the humans have at all. Because you have a freaking witch terrorist who also orchestrated the murder of a bunch of political people saying demons aren't bad. And yes, vampires are demon-infested humans. Taya then switches to lecturing the witch, quote, harm the desperate, Taya finished. They look at the desperate and feel guilty. It's easier to vilify those with less than you than to actually give a shit. Are you going to reflect on your own hunting down of innocent and weaker people like Paul? Or is it just murder vampires and child molesters, and you will always only attack real bad guys, and you were never misled by society? Yeah, we're not really seeing her awakening. She's just always been correct. Also, in case you were wondering, Jordan the witch has a very different standard that she holds gods to, while she says, well, look, you have to consider demons are nuanced, but gods, quote, the gods are many things. Good is not one of them. Give me your hand. This'll hurt. Or perhaps not. I can't keep track what those systems can numb anymore. So demons are nuanced and not evil, but gods are totally evil bastards all the time and never trust them. They do a ritual to find Sarah/Helga, and then Taya is required to pay in blood. We have another discussion about how right versus wrong is incorrect and ends justify the means. Quote, too many people boil everything down to right and wrong. More often than not, people are just wrong in different ways. Best practice is to not think in terms of correct or incorrect. It's better to look at the motivations behind someone's actions and beliefs rather than their beliefs themselves. Gives you a stronger moral footing. Honestly, this sounds a little bit like Dalen the Conqueror. If you murder 27 million people and rape 400 girls for the right reason, where you've got the brightest glow in your heart, then it's actually morally correct because you didn't do it for a bad reason. Just do it for the morally sound reasons of the good reasons you're doing it for. Taya asks if magic exists and why she can't use it, and we get this vague answer of yes, magic does exist. Most people can learn to use it. Some people have a natural inclination to use it, so they will be stronger at magic. However, most people don't care to learn about magic, and we don't know why. The witch gives Taya a magical eye drop that lets her see people's souls. So now we have even more Dalen the Conqueror, where she sees the light inside of everybody or how corrupt their souls are. These eye drops are meant to help her find Helga by looking at the souls through the floors. Eventually, Taya leaves and starts tracking first Sarah, and then she'll go after Stuart. Taya chases Sarah down to this church mission somewhere on one of the lower floors that she is hiding in and has been given cover as someone who works there as some sort of nun. However, all of the entry points are also monitored by James Labor. Shortly after, Taya asks Sarah many questions regarding Nita, and Sarah says that Nita was kept because she knew who Sarah was, and that made Robert paranoid that she was going to spill it. Then this spider drone thing comes into the church, attacks, a fight ensues, which Taya gets out of. A little worse for wear, but she'll survive, and Oscar gives her vampire blood to recover her. Back with the witch, Jordan is saying that they're going to need to turn her to keep her alive before she passes out. When Taya wakes up, Jordan tells her that she wants Taya to hand over her independent mind and become a terrorist underneath Jordan's mind control. She keeps claiming that she hasn't killed anyone with her own two hands, while also stating that she influences people if they let her. Taya just has all of these super awesome special skills that Jordan wants to use, and Taya leaves angry. Oscar follows, then explaining why the current regime acts the way that it does, and it's because magic is real and anyone can learn to do it, and that if people learned that they'd had magic kept from them, then there would be a riot. If it is this easy to incite a riot against the current people in charge of all of the regime, then just start freaking sharing propaganda about how you can all be magic users and start introducing people to how they can learn magic, and then use that to topple the regime. I don't understand. Taya is then also told that because she is human, she is carrying the burden of all of the sins of man and human society that has been caused in the past, and that she can be on the right side of history this time, which is why she should join the terrorist sect. Neglecting the fact that Oscar, too, was once human. So he's lecturing her about all the burdens she carries while he is pretending that he doesn't carry it. I guess he just counts as being born again because he's a vampire, so now he's not guilty of human sins. We also learn about this apparent huge terrorist group called 21 Faces. Maybe instead of having a news program at the beginning of this that was all about vampire rights, it could have been about the terrorist organization attacking. Maybe instead of killing some random pedophile at the beginning, it should have been tied to this terrorist organization to actually start waking up Taya to what is going on here. You know, set this up much longer ago than 60% of the way through the story. They hang out at Oscar's house talking about past loves. Both of them said they don't want kids because the world is screwed, but Oscar doesn't accept that answer. So he answers first and is like, I just don't want kids, the world is screwed. Taya's like, I don't want kids, the world is screwed. And Oscar's like, no. That's not a good enough answer. I want more answer. Why don't you want kids? Oscar, if it's good enough for you, why isn't it good enough for Taya? Answer me that. Still, she answers, saying that she lost the love of her life, who was Sid, and so she just can't imagine raising kids with anybody else. There was never anybody else, and also Sid resented her at the end of his life, and she just wants to get over all of that and move on with her life. I hate the way that this is written so much, and I hate how Taya is this victim of literally everything, and she can't even just have a relationship with her now dead husband. They get into some case-related stuff, and Taya realizes that the footage of Sarah got damaged in the fight with the spider drone, and so they don't have it to turn in to use as evidence for anything. But she wants to go to the morgue to pilfer Sarah's hard drive from the corpse so that they have some evidence against Robert and the rest of them. Sarah also conveniently sent a message just after she died, or just before she died, from beyond the grave, with some of Rich McRitchie's address in it. While traveling the metro, James Labor is on the news station with the head of the Vampire Liberation Group, Martel. Of course, they're talking about how James and the Crusaders want to push the non-humans out into the haze and segregate them. How many other species are there beyond the vampires? Because it does keep mentioning supernatural creatures all over the place. But it keeps it pretty vague. Anyway, this is part of that conversation, and I just have to show you how nonsensical this is. And like, what is this plot? Quote, Crusaders believe in protecting humanity from itself. Division has always plagued us. A fault within the very roots of our people, a humanity we don't know you even share, James said. And that's the crux of it. I am simply operating from the standpoint of self-preservation. We don't know how you operate yet. The moment humanity becomes comfortable within itself, we discover a disease creating a new form of consciousness completely alien to us. Distrust is natural, fair even. This virus threatens to suppress us once again in more extreme ways. I don't believe that we can overcome it. Hell, racism, misogyny, homophobia still plague us to this day. I don't believe accepting a predator that, by its very existence, is a threat to us is in the cards. Just as we find our Eden, the virus comes to test us. Martel said, James, you're a businessman. I'm speaking from the heart, and I'm also looking forward to seeing the word radical put next to my name in the headlines. James smiled at the camera for a brief moment. You can't deprive me from a simple pleasure of celebrity. Martel gave a polite breath of laughter before continuing. Are you speaking literally, James? Do you believe that you have a natural right to these structures and the undead do not? We spoiled God's Eden, and as punishment, we must build our own. Of course, it's lesser, but wealth is generated from the very air that we breathe. Every man, woman, and child has an opportunity to contribute to the prosperity around us, to move up in structure. Now that the world has changed, God has seen it fit to adjust our tests. What a wonderfully horrific view of the world. Martel stiffened, looking to Taya like he was realizing just what kind of rhetoric he would be working against with James. She wondered if the man normally behaved differently. You are making it rather easy for me to point out that your ideology insists on leaving no room for any other personal directions aside from the worship of wealth, as well as insists that the existence serves only to, in previous world, there was less pain but more opportunity, James continued, but now the world runs on temptation and sacrifice, heretical temptation like immortality to death. Coming back to the trending topic at hand, we've come here to discuss a bill with the amendment shoved in at the last minute that would allow a private military with no oversight to walk around with armed authorities in our streets, Martel said. At no point in our nation's history, even before the states split, has our government granted such power, a power that has no checks in place to prevent abuse of the living dead, a paramilitary group that you personally shared your wealth with, which is my right to do. You're so ready to talk about your right to use your money, yet you'll never address who exactly you're sharing it with. Martel's finger pointed accusingly. The Crusaders certainly have certain leaders that need to be put in check. I think we can all agree on that. James sounded as if Martel was already on his side, but illegal barriers have been put in place to prevent the leaders of the private sector, such as myself, from truly allowing our success to work for the people. That's all I want. I want the freedom to let my wealth spill into the floors for everyone to see the benefit of as I see fit. Your personal political donations working for the people is a stretch, even for you. Martel's fingers came up yet again. The people of this city voted on the issue, and the representatives they chose were vocal in their support of forcing me into finding an organization such as the Crusaders to work with. I still believe those laws are in violation of the basic rights laid out in our revitalized Constitution. The polls within the feed and the elected representatives disagree. Martel seemed to want to put the issue on rest, but James came back with a darker energy. Our? See, that is the crux of it. We are not able to choose who was welcome in our homes. Were we? Parasites sticking their fangs into our wallets. James, I don't see. Let's just say, shall we? Human blood, Martel. You're going to tell me my language is too severe while human blood is being spilled, consumed. James's eyes bore into Martel's, a bright blue shining under the studio's lights, though they did not accuse. You want to reduce my experience to just a simple businessman while refusing to acknowledge the shared experience of us all. Be blunt with me. We are no longer the apex predator of this world. Congratulations, you are. Amazing how you can admit to a violent pattern with your kind and object to a need for simple additional oversight. James sounded as if he were lecturing a child now. The friendly tone turned patronizing. The Crusaders aren't simply a neighborhood watch, and this bill isn't just targeted at putting more boots in the streets. It's a collaboration to push us further onward. We've made strides to not only reduce the haze's impact, but identify its origins. By working with the military resources, the limits to our contributions for the goods of the living cannot be understated. This isn't just about the dead, Martel. Again, you rely on your childish reduction of the issue. Strange how you tout talks of oversight when Crusaders, in violation of sovereign borders, have claimed a quarantine zone in the Arabian deserts for... Pause. The frick are the Arabian deserts? Is the entire world not covered in smog, or is it literally just New York? Is it just the East Coast? Is it just North America? Like, what? We're bringing international politics into this now when we're just stuck in a freaking tower in New York? Continue. Fear me? James, there is no... It's my turn to speak, James. This paranoia of yours is something that I have watched fester. No one is trying to make you into a martyr. At James's smile, Martel persisted. Is that what you want? That you've done all of it to die for? I will never die, Martel, no matter how much you secretly wish for it. Martyr Christ, I want to celebrate God's creations in worship. None of you have bothered to pay attention, have you? Martyr, my oh my, I would never let any of you touch me. I demand what is due to me, what our Creator wants for me. Humanity is hunger. We desire, and I desire more. Are you? James ignored the attempt at the question, eyes seeing far beyond the dead man's before him. I have tested all of this world has to offer. I have sinned in ways that no man without my resources could. No Lord could forgive me. I know what awaits me in the beyond, and I now, in spite of that fate, want to serve you all from the path that corrupted me for so long. I am as selfless as a man can be. I have spent fortunes perfecting my power. No, Martel, I do not fear you. I don't fear the demons that I've conquered. If anyone's listening wants a sliver of my power, wants a shelter that I can now provide, they simply must follow. So you got this dude being like, I am so freaking corrupt. I have done so much corrupt garbage that I am unsavable, even though we keep talking about God and the creation and Christ, also using Christ, whatever. But like, I don't know who this guy worships, because this is clearly not worshiping Jesus. This is clearly not worshiping the Christian God, but I don't know what else this is trying to like reference, because we got worshiping money. We got no names of any gods mentioned. And then he's going, forgiveness is past me. Forgiveness can't exist. Also, previously, he said the sin of immortality, and then he's like, I can't die. This bro doesn't make any sense. He is just evil villain arguing, evil villain monologuing for whatever sounds worse at the time, but there is no goal, no ideology behind this man, which makes him just feel like a cardboard cutout for whatever the author thought that they could shove in there. But there is no character here. There is no belief here. There is no investment in making this character true. Taya and Oscar then get the motorcycle from Stubbs to ride it to an upper floor. I don't understand how any of these things are working on this building, because now, like, they were taking an elevator, they were taking a metro before. You've got these separate floors that go up at least 100 floors, because freaking university is floor 100, but now they're just going to take the highway to get to upper floors. So I don't know how this works. Can you imagine going up 100 floors if it's like a parking garage? And so you're just like, you're gonna get sick going up, man. But I I don't know how this works. So while they're making their way to floor 99, which why is this floor right underneath the Party Central University floor? I don't know. Quinn calls and tells Taya that he is done helping her because he has seen everything that she has been doing behind his back. Taya gets mad that Quinn is the problem, not for her own corruption, but whatever. Gets to this floor that she wants to go to, and surprise, there is some sort of New Orleans inspired masquerade going on. So she and Oscar just slip into a crowd with masks on. Continuing with the rule of cool or whatever, that's what this feels like. Once they just get through the crowd, there's this long drawn out moment of like just standing beneath this fake cherry blossom tree to pose with because reasons. So we've got New Orleans masquerade, Mardi Gras reference, I don't know, cherry blossom tree that's also fake, that also has just projected petals, but the projected petals are so realistic that she can move her hand and it crumples the petal. She's then taken into Quinn's house because this is why she's come to floor 99, is that Quinn lives on floor 99. What the frick does 99 stand for in like culture society? It's a rich house in this district and people are just letting her in. Robert, James, and the Crusaders show up as she is going through Quinn's stuff. Daddy and the Crusaders leave and let Robert to find this girl and take care of her himself so that he can get a promotion or trust with Daddy. I don't freaking know. But Daddy is like, I'm going to take the Crusaders. You deal with this girl yourself. If she is such a danger, why would you leave your son with this alone? Like, you want the best possible outcome, which would mean leave security with the guy who is going to search the apartment. Like, what? Other than this being a stupid decision because you need some way out of this and all of the Crusaders would overpower her, maybe let her get arrested. Maybe let getting her out of prison be part of the story because this makes no sense. Yeah, she's super dangerous and we know she's bad, but we're not going to leave my son, who is not even some part of law enforcement, be alone with this merc criminal whatever. Taya, while Robert is walking around going, come out, wherever you are, Taya finally comes out and they confront each other. The entire conversation is nonsense because neither of these characters have any actual values to be arguing over. Robert is also just a literal repeat of James saying that God hates fangs again and again and again. They eventually fight, she's losing, and then she jumps out the window to escape because consequences be damned more than the vampires in the story. Switch over to Taya having a surreal dream about her husband and monsters at a restaurant. When she wakes up, she's with Jordan and Oscar, and they're turning her into a vampire, and somehow, despite them saying this, she doesn't know what's going on. When Taya comes to, Jordan reiterates that she needs muscle and that she wants Taya for the job, like she needs a thug. Also, she says that the missing girl was a magic user. Nita, the young girl, was a magic user. Jordan admits to lying and using Taya. Like, there were so many places throughout this to make it like, oh, here's a magic thing. This just feels like seat of the pants writing and non-revision. Because, like, what is this? Jordan admits to lying and using Taya, but still, you should trust me, bro. Just trust me on things that I tell you. She says, quote, but Oscar has grown to appreciate how I use him. You won't, but I think that you'll grow to love how you hate me. You'll see soon enough. This is about history. It's so much bigger than you or me alone. But together, I think that we can begin to make a difference. You'll have centuries to get over it. Don't be mad at me. I just see you as a tool, but like, I mean, you'll love the way that you hate me, girl. You know what I mean? Ultimately, what Taya's getting from this is that her pain doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, and she needs to shut her mouth and just do what she's told because she'll appreciate it in the future. Her purpose is more important than her life, than her individuality. This is a cult leader, guys. This is a bad person. Jordan keeps reiterating that Taya can hate her, but she's a tool, and she'll be grateful someday. Just shut up and do your job. Taya wakes up in Oscar's bed with vampire starving cravings. She eats, gets naked, starts doing some workouts in the freaking room that she is locked in as she is naked. I don't know why we got to get naked to do squats and freaking burpees, but here we are. She checks out her vampire body in the mirror because her vampire body is hotter than her regular body. Then we got a confinement montage of her like talking to the person watching her, eating, exercise, whatever, until the Crusaders passed the bill that they were talking about, and they're going to go around and tap into vampire devices. Oscar and Taya flee to go and get some guns from Naomi, and we also learned that Taya and the witch now share a soul because of the ritual that the witch did while Taya was unconscious. their feelings and telepathy that are now intertwined with one another. I think it defeats any argument that you have if you trap someone mentally with you forever after killing them. But what do I know? This is just a bad person. If you want to hate Quinn for being part of a corrupt system, you better freaking hate Jordan. She is bad news. There's no bigger bad in this. I mean, like, Robert isn't even this bad, because I get that Robert is an asshole, and in a lot of ways, he's bias against vampires isn't unfounded, because the vampires aren't doing anything against the murder that they're causing, and in fact, they are defending the murderers. But I would argue that Jordan is a worse person than Robert. At Naomi's shop, Naomi is like, bruh, I've heard about what you've been doing. Why are you traveling with a vampire? I see what's been on the news. Are you a terrorist? Are you fighting with terrorists? I'm not going to sell guns to terrorists. She quickly relents on that because she was never serious about, putting freaking Tay at a disadvantage. Her and Stubbs are basically the same. They're at Jordan's house then, gearing up with some OP gear, printing flowers on their armor and lusting for blood when Taya randomly thinks that she knows where the baddies might be and goes to her home, alone. There, she finds Quinn. Y'all are getting ready for some terrorist activity, and you're running around like a liability? Taya and Quinn fight each other. Taya gets extra mad about Quinn killing for money, even though she did the exact same thing. She delights in brutally murdering him and wishes that she'd done it sooner. Then she laps up his blood. She's completely OP, and once she's eating human, she's like, nah, fam, I'm not gonna say no to human blood ever again. This is so freaking good. I remember Oscar saying how good human blood is, and now that I've had it, bruh, screw humans. Juno randomly comes in while Taya is showering the blood off of her body. She freaks out and leaves. Jordan says, good girl, you done your job. So it did not take very long for Taya to just switch sides and be like, bruh, human lives are meant for us to eat. Which just makes Robert's argument that the vampires are too dangerous for society even more legitimate. Can somebody make an argument for the vampires based on how the vampires are acting? Because I don't see anything in this that says that saying they're too dangerous to live with humans isn't justified. Despite Juno saying she was freaked out when she saw Taya, she just goes back into the living room and then passes out on Taya's couch until Taya comes out and wakes her up later. And then she continues with Juno being like, what the frick did you do to Quinn? And he was a bad man, so that's fine. There's no problems. I am not worried about you as a person. I am not worried about you morally. It's all good. They finished dressing up for their terrorism again, and it's all correctly colored because they had spent their time 3D painting the armor to be correct for their style. It just feels like a customization thing. They infiltrate the church that James and Robert are giving a sermon at, and they're at the pulpit saying that they are victims of supernatural that they feared. The terrorists attack the church. Long fight scene with paladins coming out of nowhere. This is the first time paladins are mentioned. Crusaders are mentioned. Taya finishes off James and Robert, then cries in her victory as she feels that she's been played by Jordan, as if that wasn't obvious from the freaking start. And then Jordan says, you as a person wasn't important. You were a tool the whole time. She escapes from the church after having, killed a bunch of people. There's a train fight. She is still running until she is on her own and thinking about how she has lost everything, including all of her friends, because Stubbs has disappeared now. He has been kidnapped, and Jordan did this to her. She runs into Oscar, who helps her escape, and then says that the goal has been to create chaos this entire time. Jordan is also in the van that he leads Taya into. Taya is pissed off. Jordan says that they need to work together because she has information on where Stubbs is, and she is the only one with information where Stubbs is. She turns into a hag, which just an old ugly witch. Taya's hung up on being manipulated and how the only person who can help her is Jordan. This is more or less where we end. I don't know how what just happened doesn't cause a riot. I don't know if the next book would start out with a riot, because theoretically the way that this is posted is it is book 1 of the Neon Ghost series. I don't know, but we do have an epilogue where Oscar calls Martel, who is watching the news with everything that has happened. The political party is going to push for annihilation of the pointy teeths now, which, fair. A bunch of vampires just attacked a bunch of people in a church. which Martell has disagreed with the way that this all has been going, because Martell has legitimately been trying to create peace between humans and vampires and has like legitimately reformed. But Oscar is like, no, terrorism is fine because they weren't going to help us anyways. And also, we'd be guilty whether we did anything or not. So you know what? Terrorism is fine. At least all of the supernatural creatures on the lower levels have been released. What does that mean? I don't know. It ends with someone showing up at Martell's house, lights go off, and they say that they have come with a message. And that is the ending of everything. So how do you make sense of it? We're going to get into my final notes here now. With a couple of different sections. Number one, the genre/audience for this: YA, future fantasy, urban fantasy, and political drama. With the hook, the opening 30 pages of this read weak to me. They introduced the character just fine, which was Taya being a badass, not quite a cop, but some sort of enforcer or bounty hunter who took private work and shook people up for private employers. It also introduced you to the setting just fine, and even goes into the point of action in the first chapter, that is being on a mission and with her friend/mentor Quinn. Those were all fine elements to have in your first opening hook. Where the hook/the first 30 pages failed for me was that it didn't carry any momentum of Taya's life. There are so many asides for world building and exposition dumping, including the introduction of some random racial equality rights in chapter 2, as well as Taya's background with some man named Sid, her background with Juno, and even Juno's background, that you didn't even get this sense of movement or drive in the story, or what Taya's desires were, or what was the story was even going to be about. We're told that her job is with Carlson, but that's just another bunch of information piled on top of the rest. That doesn't even turn into anything as we go to meet her. That doesn't even turn into anything as we go to meet her friend Stubbs in the following chapter, rather than continuing forward with the story in which we were told was what this next story was going to be. There is just no sense of urgency in the first 50 pages. On the language and writing, this reads like teen fiction trying to be older by throwing in random sex references to be like, look, old people talking about sex, dicks, coffee, jokes, black. The flow in this is also bizarre, skipping over whole scenes, setting things up, etc., just to get to something else, and then act like things had been done before. I constantly felt like I was missing entire sections of this book and then had to go back to make sure that I didn't skip over things or wasn't missing pages. This novel also liberally uses the term legal and illegal in a way to just be like, I'm so badass that I don't care, or other people don't have the cheat codes that I have, or that thing over there is illegal. It's kind of ridiculous to be like, oh no, Robert did that thing illegally, while Taya is every other sentence bragging about how she has illegal devices or is doing something illegally because she can get away with it. Like, girl, you can't condemn other guy over there for doing exactly what you're doing. And again, we have a case of excessive swearing for everyone. Swearing doesn't make your story grittier or more mature. It just makes all your characters seem both immature and sound exactly the same because they're swearing in all the same ways. The dialogue is awkward, and mixing it with just how aggressive Taya is in her thoughts, and then to go tone it down slightly, sometimes in her speech, is off-putting and smarmy. Like, you get this entire sense that she puts on such a face for everybody she's talking to, and because you can see her thoughts, you see just how truly garbage of a person she is. But more than anything, there's dialogue throughout that reads like I've read it before. Like, it's just copying things that is seen somewhere else before, and it's not unique to the character. Like, there was a moment where it mentions girls loving to get cheese to go on dates, like you get into a woman's heart with cheese, and that's an internet meme. You also have, quote, the technician turned to the vampire. All this where, and she doesn't want to know how any of it works. That shit's literally inside her, and she could care less. Oscar lifted a finger as if taking point of order. It's couldn't care less. I thought Weird Al solved that like 15 years ago. I don't know how else to describe it other than it just feels like it is stating things that it has found somewhere else before. Descriptions. The descriptions used to randomly dispense information made it strange when it was not related to the first time someone does something that the thing would be noticed for. Example, your mistake is thinking that scums are the worst things that we deal with. Quinn spoke from deep in his throat, years of smoking lending a slight rasp to his words. There were way too many interruptions to deposit unnecessary information. Quote, really? Taya sent her police-grade AI, illegally gifted to her by Quinn, to obliterate the man's security. Within a second, she had his internal drive cloned and sent off to the mentor. Again, we have it saying, hey, my friend here illegally obtained this for me. I am using it illegally, but also she only insults Quinn for doing things illegally and shady and under the table. Her friends only insult Quinn for doing things illegally, shady, and under the table. She is just as bad, if not worse, than Quinn. Character descriptions are also vague, if not outright lacking, except for Naomi and Jordan. They are the only two. Quote, Juno looked at one of her many nature-inspired tattoos before looking at Taya. The building descriptions are slightly better, but it's still utilitarian for the most part. However, speaking of buildings, let's go into setting, which is that it skips time and place without telling you where you are, and then it's very jarring to try to get your ground legs back on. Let's talk about the asides really quick. Quote, approaching the Prince Stone walkway, Taya pinged the home system and smiled at the camera within the door. She directed her system at breaking the home's security, silently thanking Quinn for the illegal gift. This is not the first and only time where this happens, and what it tells you is that the author will throw things in randomly to solve a problem at any given moment, then hand wave it away with the convenience of, oh, Quinn gave her this illegal thing, oh, Stubbs gave her this illegal thing, oh, we can just, it's all dealt with. They weren't even smart enough to deal with this. It just interjects exposition and receipt of something in the same breath as it is used to solve a problem immediately and get rid of any obstacle at any given moment, making the character OP on demand. In this case, it brings up illegal. And what's that even mean? Given to her by her cop friend, it just feels like a way for the story to tell you that she's going to have all of these goodies and abilities that nobody else has, and then zing through everything because she is so special. It's also thrown around with no consequence to the point that it means nothing but bragging rights and an excuse for why others won't ever best her. Also, quote, after a pregnant pause, we need to have a serious intervention to know who is going around impregnating all of the punctuation. This is not the first pregnant pause that we have run into, certainly not the last we will run into. Fess up if that is you. World building. Clearly, from my comments throughout, it feels non-existent. Not even references to where the magic is going to randomly come up, but it being related to a god could have made more sense if society was more heavily influenced by god or religion or worship. The vampires, cyberpunk, heavy religious background for the leaders of the world, there doesn't really seem to be any world building that actually has to do with the story, rather generic references to people understanding cyberpunk to be, and mostly with ads or glowing skin ink, but this book doesn't tell me that it understands its own universe, nor what cyberpunk is, which is anti-corporatism and transhumanism. So the vampires, like, you could make the vampires work, but you didn't. It pops up how much money is in her account, tens of thousands of dollars until hundreds of thousands of dollars, but never actually does anything to establish what money means. If we're dealing with, like, money in South America, money with how it looks in North America, money with how it looks in Asia, like, we have no idea what the brackets for any of this is, which again just makes it feel like it's a video game inserting money in and out, which makes it just feel like a video game's basic economic system, but it doesn't understand how to actually build a functional, like a story functional economic system. Its money is just rewards. And then we got this question about Taya leaving her windows open to have a drone come in. I guess that's just because you've got open air and closed air. But it says that she's getting fresh air outside of her apartment. But you think if they're just freaking in this big metal block with a bunch of smaller blocks inside of it, you're just freaking getting the exhaust from all of the cars or whatever everywhere else, the factories, if there are factories, like any of that, because none of it's getting fresh air. So you would think if you want fresh air, you're going to have your window closed and you're going to have a filter on the air, because where does the fresh air come from? It's certainly not within this freaking building. Have you ever been in a building with, like, oh my gosh, okay. I used to work in a building that was a floor that had like 100 people on it. It was a single open office thing with like almost no windows. And the air circulation was trash. And there was a plague that went through at some point that got almost everybody sick. I had some chick that was like coughing her lungs up over here. This was before 2020. It was horrendous. I don't know how you're getting fresh air in this environment. That's all I'm going to say. There's also no culture on the floors, and none of the mechanics make sense. Bringing this cherry blossom that is plastic, but is also a projection on a floor that is literally described as New Orleans. Maybe have different cultures on different floors, especially if you're already going to say that that floor 100 is the freaking university floor. But then you got Quinn living in New Orleans. Why? Like, what is it? Do they have different cops on each different floor? Does she normally work on floor 99? How did she meet Quinn? Like, it stretches between this really big world and this really small world. And if it was a small world inside of this tower of whoa, then I could get it. But if it's this huge world where there's like security of their own precincts on every floor, then how does she freaking know Quinn? Because there's no way she would know Quinn if he lives on floor 99 and she lives on floor like 33. And listen to this description of this freaking tree. Quote, an artificial cherry blossom tree caught Taya's eyes. She approached the pink tree, watching the projected petals fall from the plastic branches. The tree looked almost exactly like the real thing, almost. Even ignoring the waterfall of flush petals streaming from the branches, it struck Taya as too stiff. Nothing swayed like the trees that she'd seen in nature documentaries. No birds rested on the branches. Removing her mask, wealthy residential areas rarely had extensive monitoring systems. Taya extended her hand and let the petal fall into her palm. The unseen projector captured her movement and adjusted, stopping the flower from slipping through her fingers. Whoever the artist was who designed these petals was masterful at their craft. Down to the smallest veins within the flowers, the depiction was perfect. Even the way the flower bent in her hand as it rested was exact. So do you want to say like these are crappy and not as good as nature documentaries, or do you want to say that they are so specific that you can catch a freaking projection in your hand? Maybe just make it go through your hand because it's all fake to just try to make you complicit with whatever society is like. But it wanted to be like, this is so pretty, while at the same time being like, it's so fake, and it just contradicts itself. Characters. Taya is a sadist who comes into power, but she takes glee in causing pain from the very beginning and continues to take glee in causing pain while being mad that others do the same for the exact same reason or any reason at all. Taya is also incredibly aggressive all the time, even through her thoughts, even when she is demanding things from other people. She doesn't know how to ingratiate herself, to make herself weaker, to apologize. I couldn't care about her. Then she wallows when she is alone, which isn't enough to make me care either. She's mean-spirited, selfish, a bully that beats up pedophiles to look better, and then cries over rich grannies to pretend that she's actually got empathy. But she's just using easy targets to put on a performance for the reader. Taya's constantly going to people for favors while also basically dropping slurs on them nonstop because she calls Oscar a biter and a corpse the entire time. And then asks him for favors. Why does Taya even want to be an enforcer in the first place? It doesn't make any sense. She doesn't really buy along with any of this stuff, and we don't see her have an awakening that would shake her from this belief that enforcement was the best way to go. Also, now that I'm thinking of the other floors thing, I'm like, you can just get on an elevator and go to any of the floors. There's no security, there's no border check, there's no nothing. Why doesn't she just explore other floors for different job opportunity ideas? She doesn't have to be an enforcer. Why did she become an enforcer or attempt to chase down an enforcer? Because there's nothing to suggest that she should or would. Other than, cool job, bro, you're a merc, just like in Cyberpunk 2077. There's also no sense of how long ago Sid died. He's brought up and then everyone is worried, which makes it seem recent, but Taya doesn't seem to act like it's more recent. Just like with Soul Fraud, there are no emotional responses with anyone in any of these scenes when anything is happening. And no, saying that you're having an anxiety attack and then feeling like you're going to vomit because you tortured someone isn't enough. There are no stakes in this book. This also constantly read like it was anxiety written by someone who sees psychology through internet culture, and that's just everyone diagnosing themselves because they feel mildly uncomfortable or awkward sometimes, so they throw the term out with no depth of understanding, which looks like this, quote, "You're a tremendous asshole." His shoulder nudge made Taya smile. "You're rude, condescending, bullheaded, annoying, snarky, and so clearly poorly handling trauma, a therapist might start salivating if they saw you walk into their office." So yeah, so self-aware, so proud. So I'm just sick of seeing people make some big thing about writing mental illness or mental health or marketing trauma, and then obviously having seemingly no idea what it looks like, which is what this is. Plot. She wants to become an enforcer, so that she can do work on her own and make her own money because she's always had money problems. But There are obviously other jobs that she could do. She could become a prostitute. She could go to any of the other floors and explore any other jobs that we have no idea what exists because nothing is explored. But theoretically, she wants to become an enforcer. So then she goes to Mrs. Carlson's job because that's the one that she is given. And she has to find this girl. The girl goes missing. The old lady dies. She feels ashamed of herself. So now she wants to avenge the old lady. And that becomes the plot. We have the same issue as with Soul Fraud, again, where we've got an inciting incident that has nothing to do with the ending. And that's also because the beginning has the freaking thing with the vampire rights, and we're ending with freaking terrorism because magic. Okay, themes slash other. I'm going to get into a handful of elements that were included in this that were not explored that I just wanted to talk about. Number one, in-brain ads. Non-stop or in-your-face ads are part of a cyberpunk aesthetic because cyberpunk heavily revolves around corporatism and corporations running society. The ads are placed in this story, but there is no reason that they should exist in the way that they do because there is no lean into what corporatism looks like in this. It's led by a religious zealot. We're also given zero reason for why these ads are placed into people's heads, not even Metal Gear in the eyes, ears, or brain, especially when she's going to somebody like Stubbs, who seems like less legitimate to me. So then I don't know why he wouldn't just like fry whatever is in the head causing ads. Now, you could make the brain ads work, particular in a couple of ways, but here's one that I thought of specifically. Say costs for hospitals became so much that insurance companies just stopped covering them. This skyrocketed the cost of childbirth, so corporations started sponsoring or paying for childbirth, but that also meant having a branded chip implanted in your brain at birth, which would feed you ads to pay off the cost of your birth. Then normalizing this so no one remembers a time when that didn't happen. It just is what it is, and you can pay to get the ads removed. Obviously, the money is going to go to the corporations, but it's a way of creating serfs and differentiating the lower class who can't pay for their own children. So basically, they just accept the status quo of corporations owning a part of your brain for life most of the time, while the rich people are able to pay for their own childbirths, so the rich people don't have these ads in their heads. However, we're given no explanation for why they have direct brain ads, making it feel like it's just copying an aesthetic without understanding why there are ads everywhere in cyberpunk. Of course, there are other ways that you could do brain ads. This is just the first one that I came up with. It also makes me wonder why this was the choice when Taya isn't even concerned with getting the brain freedom from the freaking ads. Like, they should be constant, and it pretends that they are, but they're not. They disappear. They're not there when she's doing her freaking showdown with the terrorism. They don't get in the way of her doing any of her missions. They're only there as an aesthetic sometimes. This leads me to the next thing, the digital mental getaway. On more than one occasion, Taya disappears into a digital landscape that connects her to some place that Juno runs, pretty much like a dreamscape, and has happened when she was getting work done on her mind or her body with Stubbs. In this digital landscape, there are no ads. The ones that she keeps going to on the beach, and she can just lay there in silence. So if you can just disappear into your own head to get away from all of the noise and to catch some of that silence, that could be its own thing. Or maybe people are wanting to escape how dreary and controlled the world is and how noisy the world is, that they let their bodies decay as they hide in this perfect dome that they made inside of their head, that they paid corporations to basically let them have a cloud to put their avatars in so they could hang out in silence, and they're just paying that normal fee to the corporations. However, that's also not addressed, nor is it addressed how there are no ads in these mental landscapes, as if you were like, remember borrowing? I shouldn't say remember, because you can still do it now with all the free websites to like host your stuff, but they're covered in ads unless you pay the pay version. But there should be ads, shouldn't there? Anyway, she can still find silence without an ad blocker, like she says, if she just goes to her mental escape. The glow/body mods. The only body mods really mentioned so far, either the injectable glowing ink, which is used more commonly like a matte ink for tattoos or like nail polish, or that one person with the teeth, or they get injected into the eyes to make their eyes glow, but Taya says that's rare. Of course, though, she has the glowing purple eyes. Why is it so rare when it's obviously safe enough cosmetically and plenty of people would be like, that's badass, I want that? I don't know. The other body mod that is mentioned has to do with having tougher skin that apparently stops bullets from going through, which allowed Taya to take fatal bullets and not die. I'm not seeing anything in this that suggests cyberpunk, but bare minimum costumes at the same extent of Alexa Dunn's book being a Regency romance, Jane Eyre, but in space. living in a tower / the smog. This novel opens up by saying the entire living situation is in a single or a pair of towers, completely shut off from the outside world because of the dangerous smog that made the air poisonous. First, I ask what benefit this adds to the story because it's not addressed in any way and changes nothing. You don't have to have the entire earth being too poisoned to live in order to have corporations polluting everything. Bring back TB or something. Bring back leprosy. That then requires people to get body mods that had started with internal filter systems and then just continued from that. And all of these things of the corporations polluting the air and then you needing to get body mods to deal with the pollution could then put them in debt to the corporations and be expensive as heck, but that's your choice of either die or go in debt to the corporations. Or something. Like, there are many ways to deal with it, but you don't need to make your future story like this, and it just seems limiting when it's not something that the setting is going to do anything with, and then you've just got highways going up 100 floors up, witches / vampires. In a highly religious society, you could make witches and priestesses of sorts, but we have no idea what magic or religion look like in this place. You could also make vampires work as some form of defective experiment that corporations were doing on people or cyber tech going wrong. And it is interpreted by the religious society to look like what it is. Instead, we're going with freaking magic is real inside of whatever this is. Magic and tech look exactly the same. However, the book hasn't addressed any of how this fits into the situation and instead introduces vampires with racial biases for drinking blood, and witches get mentioned of existing and then moves on only to have her basically just have all of the powers to be able to do freaking everything, bring people back. She just feels like a Deus Ex Machina of types to make whatever happen she wants to happen. And then you have also the mention of the random dead god, which is also not explained because we have no idea if this is a polytheistic society or a monotheistic society, if this is a Christian society. Is that why they killed the moon god? The Mars god? I don't know. Tell me how any of the politicians are wrong about having a bias against vampires when they are like, Martella is the only good one that we see. Also, I had questions about like how long the vampires had actually existed because it seemed like it had been a standard feature of society for a long time, at least since they tried to go to Mars, and nobody had tried to solve that problem yet. They hadn't been exterminated yet. They weren't ever considered humans, so why not just exterminate them? And why weren't people selling vampirism to save people from death? Why didn't Taya take her husband to become a vampire to save him from cancer? Like, there are so many options of what this could be used for. Nothing. Then you've got the religious zealots in control of the society. So we're told that the Crusade Party is in charge, and the two richest families in charge are heavily religious. What kind of religion? We have Taya saying Jesus would disapprove of that at some point. So are we supposed to believe that this is Christianity? But then he says that he worships wealth. And that's not that you can't make it worshiping Christianity or using Christianity in order to worship wealth or desire wealth, because you can. But that's not built into what this is. And we have no idea what freaking Robert and James actually believe. There is no actual Christian iconography or churches in the ads. There is no Jesus saves in the ads. Taya passes 0 churches. And also this whole thing is like, well, everything is ads or sex or whatever, and the red light district everywhere. And you can have a red light district in a super Christian society or a super religious society, but you would still expect to see that to be marginalized and have the religiousness take over the regular streets because the sex has been marginalized. Unless you've got a religion that is heavily sex positive, in which you need to represent that in the descriptions of your story building. The problem is the type of religion any of them follow is nothing, so it just feels like the author is referencing things like, so you've got the random god on Mars, and then you've got Christianity vaguely mentioned, and these are just feeling like things that the author is familiar with and then just threw in there because he didn't actually create the society beliefs in this story. It just added to that feeling of taking things that were heard somewhere else and then injecting them somewhere, even where they didn't belong. You could also legitimately world build a church into a corporation, sell indulgences, have ads trying to sell more things about the church, and talk about how financial / economic success equals being blessed by God, which is what Taya claims the rich believe. But where is this actually reflected in society? On top of that, the story mentions that rich people tried to flee the dying Earth to Mars and then failed and came back. You'd think that the people who ran society would know about this dead god, which maybe they did. We didn't hear anything from them. Maybe they killed the god to keep their version of things running, to collect money or something. But then how is it that someone who was on Mars or part of that mission, or anybody involved in like the lower levels, are not spreading propaganda on the upper levels that there are other gods? Would have been nice to see what 21 Faces was freaking doing in their spare time. Finally, the use of racism and religion in here as the story feels like a lack of utter understanding. The characters are flat, the author doesn't come off as interested in the subjects of his own book, and thus can't make them convincing. They just read straight up like, yeah, we're scamming you for money and using God's name, lol, and we are business of religion, we are, after all, a business of religion. Give me your money. It's the most baby-written antagonist that I've seen this year, and that's insulting to baby literature. This book just feels like random details with nothing built into it, and did not reflect on the person involved in the story, and did not reflect the persons involved in the story who were theoretically involved with the plot line. Overall, final comment, it's an ambitious book that attempts to have technology and magic be side by side, but doesn't bother to attempt to build a world which could make them coexist and make sense, which is doable. There is also zero nuance for the whole thing. If you're good, you're good. If you're bad, you're bad. All humans are bad, but the vampires are just sweet, misunderstood angels. Demons are nuanced. Gods are bad. It's very childish. This book is also very obsessed with the theme of religion bad and rich people bad, that it has no character. It lies about what the book will be about and then serves you nothing but a lecture, quite often, actually. With that said, those are my thoughts on Neon Ghosts, A Witch's Sin by Daniel B. Greene. Have you read this book? Will you read this book? What did you think of the plots? Is this your first time being exposed to this? Because I can definitely say that up to this point, like, I've stayed away from anything that had to do with this book, not looked up any reviews, and I went in blind, and I was definitely surprised at what this book ended up being, anyway. With that said, looking forward to your thoughts down in the comments below. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
To my children, Tommy, Ike, and Annabelle, if you forget everything else I ever said in the lifetime we shared together, I need you to remember 3 things. 1. Minimize violence done to and by women. As givers of life, it's against their nature, God's design, to do harm, and every act of violence done to them is meant to break their souls, turning what should be a giver of hope into a black widow. A woman who destroys the life and the mercy of her care for no other reason but the corruption of her own self. It is only when you come across these kinds of women that you should put them down, for they are no better than the men who tarnished them. However, take no glee in what must be done. Finding any life so far gone, a black hole is where someone's heart should be, leaves only one solution: the mercy of death, and it's a tragedy when it happens. Make no mistake, a woman's love is the most powerful thing on this earth. It can start wars, end them, and change the devil himself into someone God sees worthy of giving a second chance. She don't owe this love to anyone, but she do carry it around with her so long as she's living. That is why the devil will do everything he can to pervert women's nature and destroy their innocence. Of every crime you can commit during your lifetime, be it out of daring or necessity, for every defiance you may act out against God, government, or man, avoid harming the innocent. For the day that we become bloodthirsty beasts where love don't exist anymore is the day hell on earth has come. And as bad as it may seem at times nowadays, we ain't there yet. 2. Everything you do in your life will create consequences, both seen and unseen, extending further than you can imagine. Nothing you do exists solely within your arm's reach. Think about every decision you make, every action you take, because you won't know how long your choices will stalk you, be them destructions or blessings, rumors or history been made. The truth of the matter is, your life will be controlled not by the truth of what you've done, but by the way others carry on about you. And the thoughts of others are more real in the long term than what you know to be true. It won't stop affecting you just because it ain't real, and no matter the life you've lived, most men can't outrun what's written in them in ink. It ain't hopeless though. Be firm in knowing who you are outside of the noise, and live beyond the means of the news of the day. 3. There ain't anything stronger than a family you build for yourself. What you put together is worth fighting for. Protect your loved ones with your life, and they'll give theirs in return. Family ain't defined by blood, understand that. And for as strong as the bonds of your family are, know that you'll find just as much passion in the people who hate you. While you'll risk your life for those you care about, those who find your existence to be an insult to theirs will risk themselves to put an end to their affliction. As cruel as it may seem, a man who hates you will stop at nothing until one of yous is dead. It's a mistake to believe anything different. Don't let you be the ones taken from, be it by outlaw lawmen or by someone in between. The only one who'll be looking out for you is you and your kin. Maybe there's another way to be, but in all my years I've seen the worst of man, I ain't found another way around man's desire to conquer against all else. There ain't a changing of that mind, and sometimes I believe there ain't the ability for man to change at all, least of all through lead or legislation. I ain't claiming to be right about nothing. On many things, I don't want to be right, but what I do want is for my kids to live a better life than the one I did and avoid the mistakes that I made while finding the truth and purpose in what matter more than gold in this country. It's my hope that by sharing the things I learned that my kids will be better than their old man ever was, and that what I done isn't what people remember me for, but who y'all are going to become. That'll be the legend of Bill Cassidy.